28-year-old Gable Tosti called his dad after Warriena Wright, a woman he met on Tinder, fell from the 14th floor balcony of his high-rise apartment. "I met up with the girl for a date tonight, and, things were getting really aggressive. It was all about intimate at first, and then, after that, we kept drinking. We were both drinking. I think she was so drunk that she tried to climb over the fence and fell down." The police found an audio recording on Gable's phone that captured the ill-fated date. It should be noted that he had a strange habit of recording all his meetings with girls. Surfers' Paradise, the coastal town on Australia's Gold Coast, and one of the country's most iconic tourist destinations. 60 miles of white sandy beaches attract outdoor enthusiasts. When it comes to entertainment, there are options like water skiing, theme parks, night markets, restaurants, and sun-soaked walks. Here, you can easily meet a guy with a predatory look, a pumped-up body. In August 2014, a 26-year-old New Zealander, Warriena, enjoyed her freedom after a long-term relationship ended. Relaxing in this paradise at a friend's wedding, Warriena took a break between dances, picked up her phone, and opened the Tinder dating app. One profile immediately caught her attention: 28-year-old Gable Tosti. He wasn't the type of young man she usually liked. He looked like a guy who spent too much time in the gym, and his blindingly white smile seemed fake. But in the photo, he resembled a movie actor. By liking his photo, Warriena noticed that the guy sent her a message: "You are amazing, and I want to get to know you better." Warriena always valued intelligence above appearance and loved a good conversation with someone who had interesting opinions to discuss. Since she was single, she decided that a little flirting would lift her spirits. Warriena was a passionate defender of animal rights with a plethora of other interests, including photography, drawing, gaming, and anime. She was also known for her sense of humor. At 25, her sister encouraged Warriena to explore Tinder, and they gradually switched the topic to intimacy. Their correspondence continued for days, filled with jokes. While Gable didn't quite meet all of Warriena's requirements, she found him to be somewhat normal and good-looking. Feeling adventurous, they exchanged numbers. On August 7th, Gable and Warriena met at a nightclub on Cavill Avenue. CCTV footage captured them greeting each other with awkward hugs. Gable, who is 6 feet 11 inches and weighs 200 pounds, with petite 5 feet 4 inches Warriena, who weighs 125 pounds. A few minutes later, they were seen entering the beer garden of the Surfers' Paradise Beer Garden, then reappearing in front of the cameras, walking into a convenience store where they bought a 6-pack of beer before taking a short walk to Gable's Avalon apartment. It was about 9 p.m. Just 15 minutes later, Warriena and Gable could be seen entering the high-rise apartment building where Gable lived on the 14th floor. For the next 4 hours, they drank beer, with Gable bringing vodka several times. They even took several selfies, which Warriena posted on her Facebook page. At 1:06 a.m. on August 8th, Gable pressed record on his phone, but less than 2 hours later, Warriena was dead. Gable Tosti chose his apartment in the high-rise building because of its close proximity to the bar and the clubs in Surfers' Paradise, the infamous party strip, which was a year-round draw for attractive women looking for fun. This suited Gable's interests as someone who wanted quick intimate without commitment. Over the past 3 years, he had slept with 270 women, and this number was not an approximation. Gable kept a handwritten log of every girl he had been with, including the dates of each meeting. Gable also began making audio recordings of his dates on his mobile phone as a protective measure, as it was unknown how each meeting could turn out. Based on his experience, some girls were just crazy. Due to troubles with women complaining that he scared them, Gable was banned from 3 of the largest clubs in Surfers' Paradise. Now, every time a new club opened, security guards would kick him out even before he had the chance to drink, and he could not understand what he had done to deserve such a reputation. Furthermore, he had always struggled to understand women and people in general. Gable grew up on the Gold Coast, but over the years, the city known as Paradise brought him a great deal of suffering. Throughout his school years, he was bullied. Gable's parents treated him well, but even at home, he felt overwhelmed by the rituals he had established for himself to cope with his anxiety. The situation improved a little in the last year of high school. One day, Gable tried alcohol, and after a few drinks, the awkwardness, anxiety disappeared. He made several fake IDs to go to nightclubs like some of his peers and soon became very popular. He was approached for help in making such IDs. In the summer of 2004, everything went wrong. Gable raised his profile by selling fake IDs to minors who flocked to the city to celebrate school week. He managed to earn $30,000 before he was caught. When the police checked his computer, they found that another one of his activities was trying to counterfeit money. He had made a near-perfect copy of a $50 bill. During his trial, the psychiatrist who evaluated Gable describing him as poorly prepared to deal with people and as socially distant, emotionally aloof. He then received community service and got a job at his father's carpet-laying company. He also withdrew from everyone and lived as a recluse for 5 years. 2010 was a significant year for Gable. He went to a bodybuilding forum. He decided that he needed to communicate properly and create a network of friends. But the problem was that Gable did not know where to start. Should he create a Facebook page or find old acquaintances on Odnoklassniki? Advice and recommendations poured in. A few days later, Gable posted an update. He talked about one of his classmates with whom he hung out, went to a club, and once timidly kissed a girl goodbye, but nothing came of it. This was only with one girl, and it happened 5 years ago. After reading the advice and gaining determination, Gable wrote that he was dating a girl, this time trying to be more persistent. As a result, they had intimate in the back seat of his car. Gable worked 4 hours a day and devoted most of his time to finding a partner, sharing all the details of his successes, failures on the internet. One of the forum participants offered to buy him more drinks, although this was unethical. As a result, the number of girls with whom Gable slept was already approaching 100. However, as he wrote, the 100th girl did not impress him in any way, but he really wanted to reach that milestone. One of the forum participants reproached Gable for his desire to have intimacy with as many women as possible, to which he replied that this was how he raised his self-esteem. In April 2013, Gable discovered Tinder. It was the perfect place to date, considering his bad reputation with clubs, which had reduced his dating opportunities to zero. But even Tinder dates were unreliable, and more than once, Gable became annoyed when he was rejected. For example, a woman insisted that he leave before she got angry. He was also frustrated that some women thought Tinder was something more than a one-time meeting. Recently, Gable experienced another losing streak. He met 4 different women, 3 of whom came to his house for drinks but were not in the mood for intimacy. By August 2014, Gable had slept with 270 women, stated that it was a game of numbers. At the same time, he was heavily into alcoholic drinks, and the situation began to spiral out of control. He had recently encountered problems with the police when he failed to stop at their request and engaged in a chase with flashing lights. When he was finally stopped, his blood alcohol level was 4 times higher than the acceptable norm. On August 1, 2014, Gable went on Tinder and matched with an attractive dark-haired beauty with high bangs and big expressive brown eyes, Wariena. She was at least a 7 out of 10, maybe even an 8, Gable thought, evaluating her according to his classification system, according to which he didn't sleep with girls rated below 7. At 1:06 a.m., August 8, 2014, they drank beer together, and soon after, Gable turned on the recording on his phone. Wariena said she was already very drunk, while Gable's voice sounded sober. Later, tests would show that her blood alcohol level exceeded the norm 3-fold. Their conversation became inebriated and meaningless. She jokingly fought with Gable, demonstrating a brutal technique she had learned. Drunk, she requested another drink, so Gable poured her 2 glasses of vodka. By sound in the recording, she then even hit Gable for no reason. Things took a different turn when she expressed a desire to go home but couldn't find her phone. Warriena accused him of stealing it. When he laughed, she began to get angry, which led to a new outburst of anger. Later, Gable and Warriena were heard arguing. She started throwing small decorative stones at him. The police then could see them on the living room floor. At some point, Gable knocked her down, and his tone became rougher, while threats disturbed Warriena's voice, which sounded strained. Her breathing was constricted. It was clear she was being pinned face down. She agreed to leave, but Gable held her back. Gable said he had been beaten up by her. Now she should stay the night and he would cook her something, because he was a forgiving man. Warriena calmed down and suggested look out the window, implying she meant the balcony. Gable replied, just don't jump off the balcony. The sound of struggling and the scratching of a tape recorder. Then came a line that would soon become very significant. You're lucky I didn't throw you off the balcony, you crazy little bitch. Followed by a heated argument. Then, the sound of another struggle was heard and Warriena apologized in fear. A sound indicated the police believed he was unlocking the balcony door. Warriena started screaming. She screamed the word no a total of 33 times in 46 seconds. Body language experts later described them as the wild cries of someone genuinely afraid for their life. After 2:21 a.m., Gabrielle awoke to the sounds of fighting and panicked screams from people living on the floor directly above her apartment. Gabrielle jumped up and looked out through the glass door of the terrace. What she saw horrified her, 2 legs hanging from the balcony above. Before Gabrielle had time to react, a woman slipped down. According to witnesses, Warriena hanging, facing the building. A Gable's neighbor saw Warriena's face when she started to fall and witnessed the horror in her eyes. That look would haunt him for the rest of his life. He was so close he could have reached out and touched her when she fell past the balcony. Gable, by his own admission, saw how Warriena disappeared from the balcony but claimed he didn't hear her scream, even though it was recorded on his phone at 2:21 a.m. when she slipped and fell from the balcony, crashing to her death. A few minutes later, breathing heavily, Gable left his apartment and went downstairs. He noticed emergency workers approaching the building below, then went back inside and left through the garage exit. After wandering the streets for a while, he did not approach his apartment building. At 2:40 a.m., Gable called a store and ordered a slice of pizza before calling his father at 3:15 a.m. In that conversation, he talked about Warriena falling off the balcony, swearing he did not push the girl and wondering why this always happens to him. At 4:44 a.m., the father picked up his son and took him to the family home. The media storm that would follow the death of Warriena would begin in a few hours and would be called the Tinder murder. Reporters from major publications were riveted on Gable's personality. They dug into his past, analyzing his beliefs, psychiatric reports, and social networks, studying his posts on bodybuilding forums. Public opinion quickly turned against him. All attention was directed at the woman who just fell from his 14th floor balcony. The accusation in court focused on the fact that he recorded the incident on his phone, although this same recording proved that Gable was not near Warriena when she fell from the balcony. The prosecutor's office claimed that the threat and violence from Gable brought Warriena to such a state of horror that she deemed it necessary to escape through the balcony. In October 2016, Gable Tosti was found not guilty of the murder of Warriena Wright. The verdict was met with mixed reactions. Some supported it with applause while others shouted insults. Since then, this division has raged on social media groups, and regardless of how one approaches this case, many questions still remain unanswered. For example, why did Warriena scream for 46 seconds? Why did she seem to believe escaping was her only option if she could have called her neighbors for help while being on the edge? It's hard to believe that a very drunk person wouldn't realize the mortal danger of climbing over a railing at such a height. One theory that has received little attention posits that in a fit of rage, Gable grabbed Warriena from the balcony to pulling her back inside. Warriena managed to grab the ledge for a moment before falling to her death. And why did Gable, during the audio recording, mention balconies and the words jump and throw? The tragic death of Warriena Wright in August 2014 remains a haunting mystery, provoking intense debate and leaving many questions unanswered. Gable Tustee's acquittal has done nothing to quell the controversy, as the chilling audio recording and Warriena's desperate screams continue to fuel speculation about what drove her to climb over that 14th floor balcony. Was it fear, intoxication, or a fatal misunderstanding? Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Jennifer Clark. Donald Clark, 40, and Jennifer Clark, 30, are a married couple living in the small town of Zebulon, Georgia, USA. For a time, their life together seemed happy. They have 2 sons together, and Donald also has an adult daughter from a previous relationship. Donald and Jennifer met in 1996 when Jennifer was 18. Despite a 10-year age gap, they quickly connected and got married in 1997. The following year, they welcomed their first son, and 2 years later, their second son was born. The family settled in Zebulon, a quiet rural town. Donald has always been a hardworking man. He dropped out of high school and started working immediately at a local factory. Over time, he pursued further education and advanced his career within the same company. Jennifer, on the other hand, worked as a nurse at a nursing home. Like any marriage, their relationship seemed harmonious at first. However, after the birth of their children, things began to change. Donald's daughter noticed that Jennifer was increasingly critical of him. When Donald's daughter became old enough, she decided to move out of the house. She chose to live with her grandparents due to Jennifer's erratic behavior. Unable to wait until adulthood to leave, she moved out early to escape the conflicts caused by her stepmother. For a while, Donald's daughter lived in Florida, but at 19, she became pregnant. She decided to move back in with her father for support. During this time, Jennifer and Donald appeared to be rebuilding their relationship. However, by the time the baby was born, Donald's daughter noticed that her father's relationship with Jennifer had deteriorated again. As before, the house was filled with arguments, and Jennifer continued to pressure and humiliate Donald. Once again, Donald's daughter was forced to move out. Many people advised Donald to end the marriage, but he hesitated because he appreciated Jennifer's housekeeping skills and her role in their daily lives. In early 2008, the couple moved into a new home in the same town. Around the same time, Michael Yost, the 22-year-old son of Donald's best friend Charlie, moved in with them. Michael had serious legal problems, had dropped out of school, and had begun using illegal drugs, which led to more charges and increased police surveillance. Hoping to help Michael turn his life around, Donald invited him to live with them. Jennifer quickly became close to Michael, which soon aroused Donald's suspicions. Eventually, Donald directly asked Michael if he was having an affair with Jennifer. Michael admitted to the affair. This revelation did not seem to surprise Donald, as Jennifer had been unfaithful to him on several previous occasions. Despite her repeated infidelity, Donald always forgave Jennifer, hoping to keep their marriage intact for the sake of their children. After learning about the affair, Donald asked Michael to move out of their home. Donald began to wonder what more he could do to make his wife happy. He provided for her and their children, was a loving husband, and a devoted father. However, it became clear to everyone that the problem was not Donald, but Jennifer. Donald decided to have an honest conversation with Jennifer about their problems. They finally came to the conclusion that it was time to separate. Over the next few days, they thought it over and ultimately agreed that divorce was the best decision. Everything seemed normal, with no signs of trouble. However, on the night of March 7, Donald woke up to find a sheet covering his face. He quickly threw the sheet off and was nearly hit in the head with a baseball bat that his wife Jennifer was holding. Donald immediately called the police to report his wife's unprovoked aggressive behavior. However, when the police arrived, he calmed down and decided he didn't want Jennifer to face legal consequences, so he withdrew the complaint. The incident, nonetheless, left an impression on the police. The next day, Donald went to court and filed for divorce. Jennifer left the house and moved in with Michael. At the time, Michael was living with his grandmother. Jennifer moved in with him, leaving the children in Donald's care. The breakup seemed to work out for everyone. During this time, Donald's friends noticed that he began to do much better. Eventually, life started to improve for him. Meanwhile, Jennifer told her family about her new relationship with Michael, and they were harshly critical. Her mother called it the stupidest decision she had ever made, claiming that Jennifer had left a wonderful husband and family for someone who wasn't worth it. By the spring of 2008, Donald and Jennifer had separated, but were still not divorced. During this time, Donald focused on his work and devoted all of his free time to caring for their two sons. Raising the boys alone was a challenge for him, so he decided to hire a live-in nanny. The nanny, Danielle Young, was a single mother in her 20s with two children from previous failed relationships. Donald met Danielle at a bar shortly after his separation. She immediately caught his attention, and they spent the evening talking. A few weeks later, Donald offered her a position as a babysitter for his children. Their relationship soon developed into a romantic one. During this time, unexpected problems arose. Jennifer discovered she was pregnant, but couldn't be sure whether the father was Donald or Michael. A DNA test was required to determine paternity. Jennifer decided to share the news with Donald. She went to his home, unaware that he had hired Danielle as a babysitter. Despite their separation, Jennifer became enraged when she saw another woman in the house. She stormed in, causing a scene, screaming and arguing. She then grabbed a baseball bat, threatened to harm Donald, and left the house. Danielle was shocked by the events that unfolded. She feared not only for her own safety, but also for the safety of her children. She became convinced that Jennifer was a threat to her sons. During the summer, Danielle decided to move away from Donald, partly because of their 17-year age gap. Meanwhile, Jennifer and Donald's divorce was finalized in July 2008. At the same time, a paternity test revealed that the child Jennifer was carrying was actually Michael's. Living conditions at Michael's grandmother's house were poor. Unfortunately, neither Jennifer nor Michael could afford to move out. A few months later, the couple moved into Donald's sister's house. She is very close to Donald and was surprised when he asked her to let Jennifer and Michael stay with. However, she agreed to help. Donald was likely trying to reconcile with Jennifer. He kept insisting that the boys needed a mother and repeatedly tried to convince her to reunite and rebuild the family. However, Jennifer continued to refuse until October 2008. She eventually agreed to Donald's proposal and decided to return. She had come to realize that Michael was a failure. As both a husband and a father, he did not work, had no money, and their family lived in poverty. This ultimately led her to return to Donald. After her return, Jennifer resumed managing the household, taking care of the children, and handling daily responsibilities. Donald continued to work hard and spent his free time with his sons. Notably, he even accepted Jennifer's unborn child with Michael as his own and planned to raise the child as part of the family. Despite their reconciliation, it was evident to everyone that the couple's relationship was extremely toxic and even worse than it had been before the divorce. Nevertheless, Donald stubbornly clung to the illusion of a happy family life. Meanwhile, Michael came home from work to find Jennifer gone. She had left, taking all her belongings without saying a word. Later, Michael discovered that she had returned to her ex-husband, Donald. This devastated him, as he had been confident in the life they were building together and had even planned their future. In desperation, Michael begged her to come back. The situation became tense and unpredictable. with the potential to spiral out of control at any moment. On November 19, 2008, just before Thanksgiving, Donald's sister began to worry about him, as she had not heard from him for several days. While this might not have been a concern for most people, it was unusual for Donald, who was always in constant contact with his family. His complete silence raised red flags. Unable to reach him directly, she contacted Jennifer, who claimed she had no idea where Donald was. Following their conversation, Donald's sister went to the police to report him missing. Officers visited Donald's home and spoke with Jennifer. She explained that she had last seen him the previous night and had not noticed anything unusual. According to Jennifer, Donald had come home after work, had dinner, watched TV, and gone to bed. The next morning, he left for work as usual. Jennifer claimed they had exchanged text messages during his shift while she was taking the kids to school. Donald had read and responded to her messages. She then spent the rest of the day doing chores, but Donald did not return home at his usual time. She said she had no idea where he could be, and noted that his phone, wallet, papers, and car were all missing. Jennifer speculated that he might have run away. Donald's sister, however, strongly disagreed. She believed that such behavior was completely out of character for Donald. She knew he had done everything he could to make the relationship work, that he always put his family first, and that he would never consider running away. While gathering more information, Donald's sister discovered that he had been seeing a woman named Danielle. This revelation shifted the police's focus. They began to consider the possibility that Donald had left to escape his toxic relationship with Jennifer and was now with Danielle. Based on these details, the police concluded that Donald might have left to pursue happiness and would eventually return. Donald's sister refused to give up. She printed flyers and distributed them widely. Although the search yielded no results, it prompted the police to take further action. They noted that Donald had not committed any crimes or made any bank transactions since his disappearance. Additionally, his cell phone had not been used. These details led the police to suspect that he had not simply run away. Police began piecing together a timeline of events from the day he went missing. However, witness testimonies were inconsistent, making it impossible to determine the exact time of his disappearance. Donald's boss shared an intriguing story about him. According to the boss, Donald was determined to repair his relationship with Danielle. However, he discovered that Danielle was pregnant with another man's child. Although her relationship with the baby's father had ended, Danielle chose to keep the baby and was navigating the challenges of motherhood. Donald, who often confided in his boss, revealed just days before his disappearance that he wanted to end his toxic relationship with Jennifer and was considering starting a family with Danielle. Donald's sudden disappearance left his workplace baffled. He stopped showing up to work, didn't contact anyone, and ignored all attempts to reach him. This behavior was completely out of character for Donald, who was known for being responsible and punctual. He had recently been promoted and was putting more effort into his job, making it hard to believe he would abandon everything without explanation. Hoping to find Donald safe, the police went to Danielle's house. However, Danielle told them she hadn't seen or been able to contact him. She became very distressed when the police informed her of his disappearance. Danielle confirmed that both she and Donald had wanted to reconcile and that she had been waiting for him. She fully cooperated with the investigation, providing an alibi that was verified, ruling her out as a suspect. The police explored various scenarios to uncover a motive for Donald's disappearance, but found no explanation or trace of him. As time passed, the likelihood of finding him alive grew slim. On November 25, 2008, Jennifer gave birth to a son. Around the same time, the police obtained a search warrant for Donald's home. What they found in the master bedroom was disturbing. The room smelled strongly of cleaning products, and the bed appeared unusually clean, as though it had been scrubbed with a strong solution. The mattress and sheets were brand new, and the wall behind the headboard had also been scrubbed. However, only certain areas of the room had been cleaned. The wallpaper on one wall was noticeably faded and white, in stark contrast to the rest of the room, which was dusty and cluttered. Jennifer claimed she had cleaned the room to prepare for her son's birth, but her explanation didn't add up. Only one wall had been cleaned, while the rest of the house remained messy. Forensic experts examined the scene and found microscopic drops of blood. When questioned, Jennifer admitted there might be blood in the room, explaining that her 3 young children often fought and could have injured themselves, causing nosebleeds. She claimed her cleaning efforts were simply part of maintaining the room. However, her explanation raised doubts. Why had she focused on cleaning just one wall while leaving the rest of the house untouched? It seemed clear she had attempted to hide evidence and was now trying to mislead the investigation. Despite their suspicions, the police couldn't get Jennifer to confess. The police decided to question her children, who provided important details about the night Donald went missing. The teens mentioned that their mother had slept in the bedroom with their father that night. Later, they were awakened by the sound of someone running on the first floor. When they got up to investigate, they discovered that the back door of the house was wide open, which was unusual for their family. The children admitted they did not fully understand what had happened. Their mother, Jennifer, avoided discussing the incident. However, their testimony supported Jennifer's alibi, suggesting that she was unlikely to be involved in Donald's disappearance. The police then shifted their focus to other suspects, particularly Michael. He had a clear motive, as his girlfriend Jennifer had recently reconciled with Donald, her ex-husband. Several neighbors reported seeing Michael's pickup truck near Donald's house that evening. Michael was arrested and questioned, but the police obtained no useful information from him. He was later released, though he remained the prime suspect in the case. A significant breakthrough in the investigation occurred on December 23, when a random witness contacted the police station to report an unusual discovery. While walking his dog, the witness noticed the animal chewing on something. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a wallet containing Donald's ID. Authorities quickly responded and noted that the discovery site was near Michael's mother's house. This prompted the police to conduct a thorough search of the surrounding area. During their search, they found a baseball bat and several other items along the road. Based on these findings, the investigation was expanded to include the area near Michael's mother's home. A nearby field drew the attention of the police. After approximately an hour of searching through bushes, police found a camouflage tarp concealed beneath layers of leaves and branches. Something was wrapped inside. When they opened it, they discovered a body, its head encased in a plastic bag, wrapped in the tarp. Tattoos on the body allowed police to identify it as Donald Clark. The cause of death was determined to be multiple blunt force traumas to the head. One detail stood out to investigators: Donald was wearing pajamas. This finding contradicted Jennifer's earlier claim that Donald had gone to work. It appeared that he had been killed while sleeping in bed. Michael and Jennifer were preparing to celebrate Christmas together when police arrested them. Jennifer showed no signs of grief over her ex-husband's death and seemed content with her life with Michael. However, during a subsequent interrogation, Jennifer completely changed her story. She admitted that she had initially been sleeping in the same bed with Donald on the morning he went missing. At some point, Jennifer claimed, she awoke to find Michael standing over Donald, holding something in his hand. Terrified, Jennifer panicked and ran to her son's room, locking the door from the inside. The commotion woke the children, and from inside the locked room, Jennifer said she could hear Michael beating Donald to death with a baseball bat. After the attack, Jennifer claimed that Michael knocked on the bedroom door and demanded her help cleaning the scene. She stated that she complied out of fear for her own safety, believing she might be his next victim. Jennifer accused Michael of being a manipulative and abusive person who had kept her under oppressive control. She admitted that they cleaned the bedroom walls with bleach and replaced the blood-stained sheets and mattress with new ones. Jennifer said she later helped Michael carry Donald's body to the car where Michael wrapped Donald's head in a plastic bag to minimize the amount of blood left at the crime scene. Michael, however, provided a completely different account. He denied Jennifer's allegations and claimed that she had never truly ended their relationship. According to Michael, Jennifer wanted to reconcile with Donald only to obtain financial benefits from him. He maintained that he and Jennifer were still seeing each other regularly and stated that on the night of the murder, Jennifer called him around 1 a.m., asking to meet for intimacy. Michael alleged that Jennifer used a flashlight to signal him when he arrived at the house, indicating it was safe to enter. She supposedly assured Michael that Donald would not be home. However, when Michael entered the house, he claimed he found Donald asleep in the bedroom. Jennifer took an aluminum baseball bat from the closet and repeatedly struck Donald in the head. She then begged Michael to help dispose of the body and clean up the blood. Feeling he had no choice, Michael agreed. He later claimed that Jennifer was a dangerous manipulator who had controlled him throughout their relationship. Michael admitted to helping move the body out of town and scattering Donald's belongings in various locations. However, he kept Donald's cell phone. They used it to send text messages to Jennifer, pretending Donald was still alive. After conflicting interviews, both were arrested and charged with the premeditated murder of Donald Clark. Police believed they had planned the crime together. Michael was also charged with planting evidence to mislead the investigation. Jennifer's lawyers immediately contested the charges, arguing that she was 9 months pregnant at the time and unlikely to have beaten a grown man to death without assistance. Facing the possibility of the death penalty, Michael opted for a plea bargain with the prosecution. He admitted to complicity in planning the murder, destroying evidence, and obstructing the investigation. In exchange for his testimony against Jennifer, he received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The trial, delayed several times, finally began on January 31, 2011. The prosecution's star witness was Michael. He testified that on the night of the murder, Jennifer had called him, saying she wanted to leave Donald. Michael initially refused to help. Later, Jennifer called again, saying she had packed her bags and needed to be picked up. When Michael arrived, Jennifer attacked Donald and killed him with a baseball bat. Michael also revealed that Jennifer had threatened to cut ties with him if he didn't help cover up the crime and dispose of the body, which prompted his involvement. Several witnesses described Jennifer as argumentative and confrontational. After less than an hour of deliberation, the jury found Jennifer Clark guilty on all counts, including murder and tampering with evidence. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 60 years. Both defendants are currently serving sentences in state prisons. All of Jennifer's appeals have been denied. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Claudia Ornisi. On the morning of July 21, 2011, Stefan contacted the police in Cremona, Italy. Stefan, a resident of the city, had a daily routine of visiting his daughter, Claudia, and his 2-year-old granddaughter, Livia, for coffee. He would spend time with them, chatting, discussing news, playing with Livia, and then continuing with his day. However, on this particular morning, Stefan was deeply alarmed when he couldn't follow his usual routine. Stefan called Claudia several times before going to her house, but she did not answer, which made him very worried. Soon after, he went to her house on Via de Galli, rang the doorbell and knocked on the door, but still no one answered. Using a spare key that Claudia had entrusted to him for emergencies, he entered the house. As soon as he stepped inside, he noticed a strange, overwhelming smell that resembled a gas leak. Holding his breath, he began checking the rooms, fearing the worst. When he entered Claudia's bedroom, he discovered her lying motionless on the bed. He tried to wake her by shaking her, but she didn't respond. In a nearby crib was his niece, Livia, also motionless and cold, like Claudia. In a state of panic, Stefan rushed to the neighbors for help. An emergency rescue team of doctors and police arrived at 8:30 a.m., but both Claudia and Livia were dead. Stefan was devastated, especially by the sight of his little granddaughter motionless, wrapped in her blanket in the crib. From the beginning, investigators suspected that Claudia had taken her own life and that of her daughter. However, some inconsistencies have emerged. First, the strong smell of gas was concerning. An expert inspected the apartment and discovered 4 small propane gas cylinders, the kind typically used for camping stoves. One was positioned right next to Claudia's head at the bed, while the other 3 were placed in the corners of the room. It appeared as though she had intentionally filled the room with gas to end her life painlessly. The question, however, is whether 4 small cylinders could release enough gas to reach lethal concentrations in an uninsulated room to kill both Claudia and Livia. The apartment showed signs of ordinary disarray, consistent with a home shared with a young child. On the kitchen table, detectives found 10 nearly empty packages of Xanax, each originally containing 10 pills. Only 5 pills remained across all the packages. What caught their attention was how methodically the empty blister packs were arranged. They were stacked neatly in a row, almost as if placed that way intentionally to draw notice. This meticulous organization seemed unusual for someone in a state of despair and further heightened investigators' suspicions. Any theories needed verification. What investigators uncovered revealed a disturbing scenario. Initially, they considered the possibility that Claudia had attempted to end her life. If she had ingested 95 Xanax tablets, an overdose could have been the cause of death. However, toxicology tests showed that the drug levels in her blood were too low for such an amount. While small traces of the drug were present, they were far from enough to indicate she had taken 95 tablets. The results suggested she had been sedated and lost consciousness. What is suspicious is that Livia's blood test showed the same result as well. Judging from the bedroom scene, it appeared Claudia placed the gas cylinders, sealed their nozzles with duct tape, and began filling the room with gas. She left her daughter in the crib and then lay down next to her. This appeared to suggest a planned suicide murder, but inconsistencies in the story began to surface. For one, Claudia's relatives were firmly against the idea of voluntary suicide. The woman had no known reason to take her own life. She had never suffered from mental illness, harmful addictions, or depression. Moreover, Claudia adored her daughter so much that even if she had wanted to take her own life, she would never allow her beloved child to die. This confidence undermined the detective's suicide theory. Given the circumstances of the victim's life at the time of her death, Claudia Arn was a 40-year-old single mother. She grew up in a warm, loving family environment surrounded by her parents and sisters. She was described as a calm, kind, and pleasant woman, full of life. Motherhood had been a dream come true for her, a way to fully embrace and express her femininity. Claudia had always cherished the idea of having a family and children. Everyone who knew her described her as a devoted mother and role model. It was unimaginable for those close to her that she would harm her child under any circumstances. Though Claudia had experienced challenges in her personal life, they were not significant enough to suggest she would take such a drastic step. No matter how hard the detectives tried to find solid evidence proving this was a voluntary suicide, doubts kept arising. Claudia simply did not have a clear motive to take her life, let alone harm her child. The longer the police analyzed the crime scene, the more discrepancies they uncovered with the original suicide theory. For example, detectives could not find garbage bags in the apartment, where the cardboard packaging for the Xanax blister packs should logically have been discarded. This absence seemed peculiar. If Claudia had decided to commit suicide, taking out the trash would hardly have been a priority. This observation only deepened the mystery further. The detectives questioned whether someone preparing to take 95 pills would also think about taking the time to throw out the trash. Additionally, they noticed that the control levers on the electric meter were lowered and its lid was left open. This also seemed inappropriate for Claudia's situation. However, it was speculated that she might have been afraid an explosion could occur if gas had been filled. Suspicions were further fueled and the autopsy results came in. According to the forensic expert, Claudia and her daughter died from gas poisoning after losing consciousness from the drugs. However, fire experts denied this possibility, given the level of propane saturation in the room. For gas cylinders were clearly not enough to kill two people. This added weight to the version involving a third party. Investigators began to suspect that Claudia could not have voluntarily left this life. It was alleged that gas poisoning occurred when bags filled with gas were placed on the heads of Claudia and her daughter. Evidence of this came from the characteristic adhesive tape traces found during a thorough examination of the bodies. In this case, only one cylinder per person would have been needed, but it was deemed impossible for Claudia to do this by herself. The more the detectives analyzed the evidence, the more obvious it became that this was murder. The suicide theory was quickly abandoned. When detectives inspected the gas cylinders, suspicions only grew stronger, as no fingerprints were found on their surface. The idea that Claudia could have carefully wiped every canister clean before placing it on the floor seemed absurd. While the use of gloves could justify this, no such gloves were found anywhere. Although they might have been discarded, there was no evidence to support this. Additionally, there were no fingerprints on the Xanax blisters either. This raises further concern, as handling removing 95 pills would inevitably leave a trace. It became increasingly clear that detectives were looking for a killer, or potentially multiple killers, who were involved in this crime. Investigators shifted their attention to the gas cylinders and Xanax, focusing on tracing their origin using the serial numbers on the packaging. The process was complex and laborious, as it involved not only the city of Crema but also the entire Lombardia region. Through a thorough investigation, they traced it to the town of Cariati, which has a shopping mall. There, they found the gas canister and Xanax that matched the shipments found at the crime scene. Records showed that the pills were purchased there on July 16, 2011, just 4 days before the tragic incident. However, the buyer paid in cash and used a non-personalized discount card, making it difficult to identify them. Nonetheless, investigators persisted and uncovered that the individual had used the card on July 19 to buy food and beverages in a nearby city. Fortunately, a store clerk remembered the customer, a grumpy man, estimated to be 45 to 50 years old, of average height and elegantly dressed. He spoke eloquently but did not provide his name. The July 19 purchases raised further suspicion, as the man bought adhesive tape, potentially used to secure the buttons on the gas cylinders, causing them to release gas automatically. At this stage, the man's identity was still unknown. Authorities were working to determine who might have had a motive to harm Claudia and her daughter. The evidence suggested someone close to Claudia, as there were no signs of forced entry, indicating that she had willingly allowed the person into her home. This led investigators to focus on people she knew well. Ultimately, they concluded that the prime suspect was her ex-partner, Maurizio Iori, a well-known ophthalmologist in Crema and the biological father of her daughter, Livia. Maurizio was a man of good reputation, with a successful career and a respected family background. Claudia had a brief but intense relationship with him, which started in 2008 when she visited him as a patient. Mauricio's polite, kind, and professional demeanor immediately appealed to Claudia, who was lonely at the time. She quickly developed feelings for him. Being a prominent and accomplished man, he soon invited her on a date, and his refined manners and attentiveness captured her heart. However, their journey toward happiness faced a significant obstacle. Claudia was single and free, while Maurizio was married with 2 children. From the beginning, this bothered Claudia, but Maurizio reassured her that his marriage was troubled and he was planning to get divorced soon. As their relationship deepened, they began meeting in secret, often traveling to other cities to avoid raising suspicion from Mauricio's wife. He explained that secrecy was necessary because if the affair were discovered, it could complicate the divorce process and division of assets. Claudia gradually felt trapped in the role of a mistress and started to question her place in the relationship. Conflicts occasionally surfaced, but Maurizio always managed to calm her down, urging her to wait until the situation was resolved. Her hopes for a better outcome were shattered in May 2008, when Claudia discovered she was pregnant. For Maurizio, the news was unwelcome and infuriating, as he made it clear he did not want children outside of his marriage. This heightened the tension between them, leading to their separation. Claudia pinned her hopes on the child, believing motherhood would bring her happiness and purpose, but instead, the pregnancy further deepened her struggles. After their breakup, Claudia began to see Maurizio differently. She realized he was never truly committed to building a family with her but was only interested in having fun on the side. His politeness and kindness disappeared entirely. He pressured her to have an abortion, but she was shocked and devastated, so she refused and was determined to keep the pregnancy under all circumstances. For 3 months, Maurizio persisted in urging her to end the pregnancy, but Claudia held her ground. Eventually, he met with her again and made his intentions clear. His primary concern was protecting his reputation. He insisted that no one should ever find out about Claudia or their child. He demanded that she keep her distance and avoid contacting him. Claudia, however, refused to comply. Feeling deceived and betrayed, she was determined that her daughter would not grow up in secrecy or obscurity. Resolute in safeguarding her and her child's future, Claudia sought legal help to force Maurizio to recognize his paternity. As Claudia's pregnancy advanced, Maurizio finalized his divorce. To her dismay, she discovered he had started a relationship with another woman before breaking up with her. Even more shocking, this new girlfriend was also expecting a child. This confirmed Claudia's belief that Maurizio had been dishonest and deceitful toward her. In the meantime, he concentrated on safeguarding his own interests. He was preparing to marry his new partner, a wealthy woman who aligned with his social status. He feared that if information about his relationship with Claudia or the fact that he had a child out of wedlock were revealed, his career and reputation would be severely affected. He admitted this fear to Claudia frankly. On February 3, 2009, Claudia gave birth to her daughter, Livia. Over time, Maurizio softened slightly and agreed to provide limited support for Claudia and the baby, who lived with Claudia's parents. He pledged to pay $400 per month for Livia's expenses and purchased an apartment for them, covering its mortgage. However, he restricted himself to visiting his daughter only once a week. This arrangement strained their already tense relationship. Despite everything, Claudia remained hopeful, believing that Maurizio might eventually develop genuine love and affection for Livia, grow into his role as a caring father. The last scheduled meeting between Maurizio and Livia was set for July 20, 2011. Claudia's mother told the police that Claudia had been feeling unwell, and Maurizio planned to visit to support her. He suggested they have dinner featuring sushi, a surprisingly out-of-character choice for him. Claudia's mother immediately found his behavior strange. Maurizio disliked fish and had never stayed with them for more than an hour, let alone brought food or made thoughtful gestures. Additionally, he brought a package of sauce that police would later confirm he had purchased on July 19, 2011, a detail that would become critical in the subsequent investigation. Claudia's mother grew convinced that Maurizio was connected to what happened afterward. Her greatest distress came from Claudia's genuine belief that Maurizio was finally trying to put effort into their relationship. Claudia had been so optimistic about the dinner, even borrowing her mother's best items for the occasion. Tragically, those items were later found the next morning on the lifeless bodies of Claudia and her child. The police quickly launched an investigation and identified Maurizio as the main suspect, bringing him in for questioning. While denying any involvement, he voluntarily went to the station and stated that he had not been at Claudia's apartment that evening. He provided an alibi, claiming that on July 20th, he left his office at 6:30 p.m., got takeaway food, ate it at home, and then went to the cinema at 9 p.m. He said he paid for his movie ticket in cash and returned home to sleep after watching the film. Mauricio's alibi fell apart quickly. He claimed he didn't keep his cinema ticket, but police reviewed security footage and confirmed he wasn't among the 38 people leaving the session. His mobile phone data added to the inconsistencies, as it showed his phone had stayed near a beach house several kilometers away during the entire evening, contradicting his claim of being at the cinema. It became clear that Maurizio had lied about his whereabouts. When police questioned Mauricio's wife, she revealed that she had tried to contact him multiple times without success. Starting at 7:30 p.m. and continuing until 11 p.m., she repeatedly called him, but he never answered. She also tried reaching his office and friends, but no one knew where he was. Eventually, she contacted a neighbor near their beach house, who confirmed seeing Mauricio's car parked outside. Suspecting he was inside, the neighbor called him but received no response. Upon entering the unlocked house, it was empty, but Mauricio's phone had been left behind for the entire evening. As investigators searched the house, they discovered a note addressed to Mauricio, written by Claudia. The note revealed a shocking secret about Mauricio's illegitimate child. The neighbor, who noticed the note, alerted the police for further investigation. Later, Mauricio returned to the beach house around 2 a.m. and called both his wife and the police to assure them he was safe. However, his explanations only deepened suspicions. Police proceeded with the investigation, increasingly convinced that Mauricio's lies and attempts to hide the truth were unraveling. Based on the CCTV footage, he did not return to the beach house, which led investigators to believe that he was at Claudia's house during that time, confronting his daughter and his estranged lover. His alibi was shattered by his wife's nervousness, which further complicated matters. Mauricio, a well-known ophthalmologist, resorted to lying, raising even more suspicion. Evidence against him mounted rapidly. It was revealed that he had purchased multiple packages of Xanax at a shopping center in another city, paying in cash, likely to avoid detection. Store employees later identified him through receipts linking to online orders found on his computer, as well as from search history showing he had researched how to kill someone with propane or Xanax. He seemed particularly interested in the case of a Moroccan prisoner who died due to a propane gas tank. When questioned about these suspicious purchases, including gas cylinders, Mauricio claimed that Claudia had spoken about using them to heat baby food for Livia. However, the Supreme Court found this explanation unconvincing. Overwhelmed by the mounting evidence, he eventually confessed that he had not gone to the cinema that evening as he initially claimed. Instead, he admitted to visiting Claudia and stated that when he left, she and Livia were alive and well. He claimed to have no knowledge of what happened afterward. Mauricio justified his lies as an attempt to conceal his affair from his wife and mislead investigators. Nonetheless, his extramarital relationship, along with his deep resentment toward his daughter Livia, became widely known. During a police search of the house, officers discovered a dramatic letter detailing these incidents and emotions. Claudia described Mauricio as a ruthless and deceitful man who betrayed her. It was after the birth of her child that she felt the full weight of despair. Her frustration stemmed from Mauricio's cold and even cruel behavior toward the baby girl immediately after her birth. It seemed as though he viewed the child as inferior. At the same time, Claudia discovers that Mauricio has an illegitimate child and plans to marry the child's mother soon. The arrival of the baby left Claudia confused and hurt, unable to understand why Mauricio treated her and their child so poorly. It became apparent that he did not consider her his equal, had no intention of marrying her, and had no plans to remain a father to their child, Livia. Meanwhile, Mauricio's mother, Paula, played a dominant role in his life. It was clear that Mauricio was completely under her control. He feared her disapproval and, as an adult, would hide details about his personal life, relationships to avoid her judgment. Even though Paula was unaware of his affair and its consequences, he seemed convinced that Claudia would never gain his mother's acceptance under any circumstances. As a result, he kept Claudia a secret, but she began pressuring him nonetheless. His intentions and motivations were unclear, particularly since he consistently denied any wrongdoing. Most of the evidence in the case was circumstantial, and authorities were unable to locate the murder weapon. Investigators focused on finding a bag of trash from Claudia's apartment, believing it contained critical evidence such as gloves and pill packaging. Mauricio likely disposed of the bag. In her letter, Claudia hinted at being blackmailed, which may have cornered her. Meanwhile, Livia was mostly rejected by Maurizio and encountered hostility even before her birth. The tipping point for Mauricio's decision to kill Claudia and Livia appears to have been her demand that he take full responsibility for Livia, treat her as an equal member of his family, and stop belittling her. Maurizio saw this as a serious threat to his carefully constructed life, his reputation, financial stability, and, above all, his mother's approval. Financial issues played a significant role as well. Claudia did not work, leaving all her expenses to be covered by Maurizio. Evidence revealed that, 3 months before the murder, Maurizio had been researching ways to recover mortgage payments for the apartment he had bought for Claudia. This indicates that he meticulously planned the crime to minimize financial losses stemming from the affair. On the night of October 11, 2011, Claudia and Livia were waiting for Maurizio to visit, as planned. He arrived with sushi, soy sauce, and drinks, all of which had been laced with a sedative. Claudia dressed up and prepared her daughter for the evening, hoping to charm Maurizio and mend their relationship. However, he had come with the intention of committing a double murder. After dinner, Claudia and Livia lost consciousness from the sedatives. Maurizio carries them into the bedroom and stages the scene to make it look like Claudia has harmed her and her daughter. He placed gas-filled bags over their heads, sealing them with tape. Once they were dead, he cleaned the scene thoroughly to remove any evidence, disposed of incriminating items, and left. Around 3 a.m., he drove to his beach house. On October 14, 2011, Maurizio Iori was arrested and charged with the premeditated murders of Claudia and Livia. The trial shocked the public, as it was hard to believe that a respected doctor could kill his mistress and their child. Despite the defense's arguments and requests for a reduced sentence, the court found the crime to be carefully planned. In January 2013, Maurizio Iori was sentenced to life in prison. His lawyers appealed, but the Supreme Court upheld the sentence in 2015. He was also ordered to pay $600,000 in compensation to Claudia's family. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Maurizio maintained his innocence and continued to speak to journalists, describing the trial as unfair and claiming he had been framed by the authorities. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Sungnam Kwan Lisowski. Our story today focuses on the Lisowski family. John and his wife Sungnam, along with their 2 daughters, Victoria and Christine, live in a town called Aurora in the United States. John's job requires frequent international travel, including trips to Korea, as the company's headquarters are in the United States while some factories are located in other countries. During one of these trips to Korea, John met Sungnam Kwan. He quickly fell in love with her and asked her out. After several dates, they decided to get married. They married in 1983 and moved to the United States. Their first daughter, Victoria, was born in 1988, followed by Christine a few years later. Although the family seemed perfect, some people found Sungnam too strict with the children. For a long time, John reassured himself that the strict nature of Asian parenting was normal, attributing it to his wife's cultural background. However, as tensions mounted, he began to realize that something was wrong. Sungnam's expectations of the children were too high, too strict, and sometimes even harsh. John's displeasure did not affect Sungnam much. She continued to impose more rules and insisted on their strict enforcement. Notably, the children were forbidden to discuss their family with anyone outside, even their friends. Meanwhile, Victoria and Christine socialized with friends and occasionally visited their homes. During these visits, they found that their friends' parents treated them much more kindly and warmly than the constant criticism they faced at home. While their friends' mothers would bake with them on the weekends, Victoria and Christine's mother decided on their interests without ever consulting them. Every weekend, she woke Victoria and Christine up at 6 a.m. and forced them to practice the piano, scolding them even if they made the slightest mistake. If they messed up, she would hit their hands. Victoria and Christine were never praised. Even if they played perfectly, there was no encouragement. Eventually, Sung-nam had to use a wooden stick to discipline them. If they relaxed for a moment or hunched over, they would be beaten by her. John disagreed with this method of education. However, Sung-nam achieved results. Victoria and Christine quickly mastered the piano, began to participate in competitions, and even won awards. However, deep down, they did not find joy in their achievements. Sung-nam convinced John that her goal was to raise gifted children and that this harsh approach was necessary. Sung-nam had a hot temper and would quickly lose control, leading to dangerous behavior. This created a tense atmosphere in the family, where even John felt uncomfortable around her. Sung-nam firmly established her dominance in the family and made all the decisions. She often intervened in conflicts, even when she was not directly involved, relishing the role of judge. This situation took place during a conflict between Christine and Victoria. The two children were arguing about something trivial. Christine quickly apologized, but Victoria, the older sister, did not accept it. This made Sung-nam unable to bear it. Ignoring Victoria and Christine's feelings, Sung-nam became angry. She stood up, walked past Victoria, and began to punish Christine. Christine was confused and did not understand why she was being beaten. Sung-nam hit her so violently that Christine's face was left bloody as she slid down the wall, unable to get up. Victoria watched in horror and began to scream an apology, begging her mother to stop. The beating only ceased when Victoria screamed. Sung-nam then turned to Victoria and warned her that if she disobeyed again, Christine would be punished. She made it clear that she would hurt little Christine every time Victoria defied Sung-nam, ensuring that Victoria would feel guilty about it. Many may wonder why John, the father of the children, did not step in to stop his wife and help his daughters. The truth is that John could not influence his wife. He was also the target of her anger. At the time of this incident, John was working late at the office, trying to avoid the increasingly tense atmosphere at home. This distance made it difficult for him to be involved in his children's lives. By the time John realized that the situation had escalated beyond normal limits, it was too late to intervene. While he was at work, his children were suffering from constant abuse at the hands of their mother. She often assaulted them. John was also involved in a number of disturbing incidents. On one occasion, Victoria went to a friend's house after school. There were obvious injuries on her body, and many suspected that something was wrong in her family, but Victoria remained silent. While she was at her friend's house, the phone rang, and Victoria was called home because something had happened. Victoria braced herself and returned to her house. As she approached, she saw her father standing at the door, talking to the police. He had a large, fresh bruise and a cut on his cheek that looked quite frightening. Victoria overheard her father's conversation with the police. He was making excuses, insisting that he had just fallen and that there was nothing to worry about. However, Victoria understood the truth of the situation. It was clear that after the initial violence, her father had tried to confront his wife to protect the children. Unfortunately, he was severely beaten, and Sung-nam even threatened him with a knife. Since then, she had completely dominated the family. John was too afraid to speak up because he feared for his own safety. Sung-nam's violent outbursts were terrifying. All the family members tried to keep their distance from her. John spent more time at work, trying to stay away from home as much as possible. He built a successful career, becoming the director of a telecommunications equipment company, and often traveled for work. Victoria and Christine followed suit, spending more time at school or with friends to avoid being at home. This situation continued until Victoria and Christine entered high school. During this time, the distance between John and Sung-nam grew. He began working longer hours, taking extra shifts, and often left the house before everyone else woke up. He would wake up early and come home later than everyone else. Unfortunately, Victoria and Christine could not escape this situation. They were still stuck in a stressful environment with their demanding mother. During this time, the cruelty towards Victoria and Christine escalated significantly. One day, an argument broke out between the two sisters. Their mother, Sun Nam, intervened by locking her daughters in a stuffy, dark garage. She forced them to sit with their hands raised for hours. When she finally opened the door, she found Victoria and Christine exhausted from the heat, but Sun Nam chose not to let them out. Instead, she refused to give them water and simply closed the door again. It was later revealed that she had gone to the store, leaving her children in that miserable situation. Victoria and Christine sat for hours in the sweltering heat, feeling miserable but too afraid to go outside, knowing that it would only make their mother angrier. One day, while driving down the street, she lost control of the car, causing Victoria and Christine to bang on the door from the inside. They were confused by their mother's actions. Passers-by noticed her driving erratically, and when they approached, she claimed that the children were late for the bus, justifying her reckless speed. Witnesses described her as unstable, with wild eyes. In addition, Sun Nam flaunted her wealth to make those around her jealous, even though she did not work. All her spending was done with John's money and credit. Sun Nam lost control of her finances to the point that John's steady salary was no longer sufficient. The situation became serious when they faced eviction due to unpaid utility bills and mortgage payments. Despite this threat, Sun Nam had no intention of stopping her spending habits. She continued to buy expensive items and frequented the city's posh clubs. John was unaware of the accumulated debts until it was too late. Sun Nam adopted a reckless lifestyle, spending her evenings at clubs while neglecting her children. When the threat of eviction became a reality, John could no longer bear the situation and made accusations against his wife. This caused her to react violently, leading to heated arguments that eventually escalated into physical violence. She hit John several times, forcing him to retreat to avoid hurting her. Despite his efforts to calm her down, she continued to attack him. In response, he grabbed her arm to restrain her until she calmed down, leaving marks on her wrist. Seeing the situation, Sun Nam decided to call the police. She claimed that her husband was abusing her. She misrepresented the facts, insisting that John had attacked her and that she had to endure constant verbal abuse and violence from him. Sun Nam continued to portray John as abusive and threatening. Finally, Victoria could no longer remain silent and informed the police that her mother had lied. She gave a truthful account of what had happened, as she had witnessed the entire conflict. Victoria explained that her mother had thrown the first punch, and even when John tried to calm her down, Sun Nam continued to act aggressively and threateningly. Faced with these conflicting stories, the police could only leave, suggesting that the family resolve the matter themselves. After the incident, nothing changed. Sun Nam continued to spend the money her husband earned. When John found out about this, he was furious and decided to confront her over the phone. Before the call, he had blocked her access to their accounts. During the conversation, Sun Nam lied and argued. He did not realize the potential consequences of his actions. When Sun Nam discovered that John had blocked her access to all of their accounts, she stormed into his office with a knife, threatened him, and cornered him. Faced with the threat of violence and with his children witnessing the chaos, John felt compelled to unlock the card. After this incident, John threw himself into work, taking more business trips to avoid his wife. To manage the expenses for the children and household bills, he was often away from home. In the fall of 2002, John went on a short business trip to China. During this trip, he met another woman and fell in love with her. John began looking for every opportunity to return to China to be with her and intended to divorce Sun Nam. On September 5, 2002, he emailed Sung Nam to inform her that he wanted a divorce. Although he had been struggling to fulfill his responsibilities as a father, he now wanted to take their children to China to be with his new girlfriend. He had a clear advantage over Sung Nam in that he had a stable income, while she did not. As a result, the ideal life she had tried to portray began to crumble. Sung Nam called John to discuss their personal problems. She was furious after receiving his message, and the news of his decision to divorce shocked her. He confirmed that he intended to initiate divorce proceedings as soon as he returned from his business trip. Sung Nam angrily threw the phone at Victoria, saying that their father wanted to take her and her sister to China. Victoria remained calm, picked up the phone, and told her father that this was a great plan, as living with their mother was unbearable. She expressed her eagerness to leave home and waited for her father to return. Sung Nam was acutely aware of the difficult situation around her. During the Christmas holiday of 2002, John returned from a business trip. At that time, Victoria was 14 years old, and her sister Christine was 12. John was 46 years old, and Sung Nam was 41. While everything seemed to be falling apart, Sung Nam noticed that everyone else was in a good mood. Despite being very angry, Sung Nam did not create any conflicts, which made Victoria and Christine feel uneasy. On the contrary, John appreciated the quiet atmosphere. When John returned from China, Sung Nam had completely changed. She prepared gifts for the whole family, dressed neatly, and decorated the house. She began serving drinks, creating a pleasant atmosphere. Sung Nam placed glasses for everyone and then stepped away to continue washing dishes. Victoria and Christine noticed something white at the bottom of their drinks but did not have time to warn their father before he finished drinking. Realizing that something was wrong, Victoria and Christine pretended to drink but secretly discarded their drinks. When Sung Nam left the room, they noticed that John seemed sluggish after drinking. He said he felt tired and went upstairs to sleep. Although Victoria and Christine had only taken a few sips, they also felt weak. They fell asleep until 8 a.m. the next day, December 25, 2002. Christine and Victoria woke up feeling unwell, not remembering how they had gotten to bed, but at first, there was nothing alarming. Victoria suspected that her mother had put sleeping pills in their drinks, although the reason was unclear. She felt relieved to wake up and find herself alive. Victoria and Christine decided to go downstairs to wish everyone a Merry Christmas. However, before they could leave the room, they heard a loud noise from the first floor that sounded like a gunshot. Earlier that morning, Sung Nam had sneaked into John's office, where he was working. She shot him once in the head from behind and then shot him 3 times in the back. Afterward, she went upstairs and stopped at the door. Victoria and Christine were horrified to see her reloading the gun. Sung Nam begged for forgiveness, saying that she had to do it, then pointed the gun at Victoria. There were 7 bullets left in the magazine. Christine, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly regained her composure. Seizing the moment, she grabbed the phone and called the police. Christine could wait for the operator to answer while Sung Nam reloaded. Christine tried to tell the police that there was a shooting in the house and provided the address. Soon, the police heard a series of gunshots as the call continued. Christine had to run away to escape her mother, who was about to shoot her. She ran into Victoria's bedroom just seconds before her mother opened fire. Christine was injured, but against all odds, both she and Victoria survived. She locked the door and waited for rescue, praying that her mother could not get in. Meanwhile, the patrol officers arrived at the house in emergency mode. Within minutes, they parked outside and heard several gunshots from inside, followed by silence. Unsure of what was happening, the officers cautiously entered the house with their weapons drawn. Inside, they first found John, who had been shot multiple times. Sung Nam shot himself behind a locked door, and she is unconscious. They also discovered Victoria and Christine, wounded but fortunately still alive. All three of them were rushed to the hospital. They were seriously injured and needed immediate medical attention. As they began to recover, the police interviewed them to gather information about the shooting. Sun Nam was in worse condition, but Victoria and Christine seemed to have little concern for her. On September 5, 2002, Sun Nam applied for a gun license. It took some time, but by December 17, she had legally obtained a pistol. Over the next week, she practiced target shooting diligently. This preparation suggested that the crime had been planned in advance. Sun Nam confided in her friends about her hatred for her husband and even mentioned her intention to buy a weapon to kill him. However, her friends considered Sun Nam's comments to be expressions of anger and did not believe that she would actually carry out her threat. The attack and Sun Nam's parenting made her friends key witnesses for the prosecution. Their testimony shocked both the jury and the experienced police officers. Sun Nam was sent for a psychiatric evaluation, which determined that she was fit to stand trial. The prosecution argued that Sun Nam had carefully planned the murder and attempted to kill her entire family, proving that she had intent and was of sound mind. Ultimately, Sun Nam Kwan Lisowski was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 45 years. Victoria and Christine were sent to live with their aunt and uncle. Throughout her incarceration, Sun Nam continued to misbehave and denied all charges against her. In 2008, Sun Nam confessed to her actions, saying that she could not accept the idea of divorce and was desperate to keep her husband, who had chosen to be with another woman. She admitted that she had tried to harm her children because she could not bear the thought of a stepmother caring for them. Sadly, in 2008, Sun Nam took her own life while in prison. Victoria and Christine wrote to her, hoping for a future reunion, but that day never came. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Pamela Vitali. Pamela Vitali was born on January 11, 1953, at Shepherd Field Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, to U.S. Air Force Sergeant Vern B. Ludke, an accomplished pianist, and Carol J. Crowley Ludke, a vocalist and artist. Pamela spent most of her life in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with her family, including her sister Tamara. In her later years, Pamela worked as a flight attendant and visited various countries around the world. She met her first husband, Mario Vitali, in London, and then moved in with him. They had two children, Mario A. Vitali and Marissa A. Vitali. Despite appearances, their relationship was not the best from the very beginning. When it began to collapse, Pamela decided to return to the United States, taking her two children with her. In 1978, she moved to California in search of a better life. As a single mother, she could no longer work as a flight attendant for obvious reasons, so she tried her hand in various fields of activity. She worked as an accountant, a salesperson in a fashion boutique, and a manager in a computer company, but felt that none of these jobs were right for her. Nevertheless, Pamela continued to work to provide for herself and her children while also attending film school at the University of California. This path became more successful. Pamela enjoyed realizing herself in cinema, and eventually, she became a producer. Pamela's career took off during her third year of film school when she met her future second husband, Daniel Horowitz, who was a lawyer. He was a professional in his field, combining private practice with creative writing. Daniel wrote a script and saw great potential in it. He began looking for a producer who might be interested in his vision. His friend Tamara found out about the script and introduced them. Pamela became interested in the script, and thus a romance blossomed. A month later, she moved closer to him, and they began working together. Daniel and Pamela prospered financially. Thanks to Daniel's advocacy work, he gained popularity, which brought him many famous and wealthy clients. He frequently commented on high-profile criminal cases on television, even weighing in on the Michael Jackson case. Their inner circle knew Daniel and Pamela as happy people who sincerely loved each other, got along well. They seemed not just like spouses but also like best friends who understood each other perfectly. They had a bright future ahead of them. The next step they decided to take was to buy a big house together, unaware of how tragically their happiness could end. Around 6 p.m. on October 15, 2005, Daniel returned home after work. At that time, they lived in a prestigious area of a small town located approximately 30 kilometers from the city. Daniel had recently acquired a plot of land and moved in with his wife, while her children had already grown up and were living separately. Though they were a wealthy couple, they were living in a trailer because their dream home was still under construction. They were so close to realizing this dream that they were willing to endure any inconvenience. When Daniel returned home, he immediately noticed something odd. Pamela's car was near the trailer, although she should still have been at dance class. He initially brushed it off, thinking she had simply returned home early. Daniel took 2 bags of groceries and approached the trailer door, but froze in place as he saw a large stain of blood on the ground. His heart raced, but he tried to shake the thought away. However, when he opened the door and went inside, he found his wife on the floor in a fetal position, covered in blood. Daniel knew how to provide first aid, so he leaned over her body to turn her over. In that moment, he realized she was dead. She was cold to the touch and clearly had died several hours prior. Rigor mortis had already set in. He called emergency services and reported the incident. After hanging up, he leaned over his wife's body again and screamed so loudly that neighbors all over the area heard his heartbreaking cries. On the morning of the tragedy, apparently, someone had come in early that morning. Pamela opened the door, which led to an altercation. She managed to push a large TV toward her attacker, probably trying to defend herself, leaving traces of her bloody hands on it. Pamela desperately fought for her life. A mix of her blood and the attacker's was found on the floor. Particles of skin from the murderer were found under her fingernails. Despite her desperate resistance, Pamela was brutally beaten to death. The forensic examination revealed that Pamela had a broken nose and several knocked-out teeth. She was killed by blunt force trauma to the head, which caused massive hemorrhaging in her brain. The attack was so brutal that portions of her scalp were torn off, and there were fractures on her skull. The attackers even inflicted wounds on her stomach and left a symbol on her back that looked like the letter H. It appeared that the attacker had spent considerable time in the trailer with Pamela. The detectives discovered that someone had taken the water and bathed, leaving behind smeared blood. It was possible that some of the cuts on Pamela were inflicted after her death. Naturally, detectives first suspected Daniel himself, as this crime was committed with extreme cruelty. In such cases, it is often found that the guilty party is a close person with a motive. In any case, Daniel had a reliable alibi. Several people could vouch for him that day. It was a usual day for a lawyer. He left the house around 8 a.m. and did not return until 6 p.m. The high-profile murder of a famous female producer attracted wide media attention, and this case was actively covered on television. Numerous rumors immediately began to circulate. It was about a prosperous, developing area with wealthy residents, where such a massacre of an innocent person was least expected. The local community wanted to know the truth before the next attack happened. It was necessary to stop the bloodthirsty criminal. Pamela was found in her underwear. Here were no traces of a break-in, which confirmed their suspicions. Only a husband or lover came to mind. There was no evidence of abuse, and nothing was missing from the trailer, despite the fact that the wealthy couple had a lot of valuables inside. This meant that theories involving abuse or robbery were unlikely. Nevertheless, even after the alibi was confirmed, the rumors did not stop. Some speculated that Daniel could not have committed the crime himself. As a lawyer, he constantly communicated with potentially dangerous people who could easily have carried out something similar at his behest. Detectives carefully checked this theory, analyzing the data on his computer and phone. However, they found no grounds for suspicion against Daniel and could not confirm that Pamela had a lover. Nevertheless, law enforcement officials did not abandon the idea that the criminal must have been well acquainted with Pamela. He was probably a resident of the area. This theory was not without foundation, as a statement was found in a trailer indicating harassment. According to Daniel, They had been persecuted for quite some time. As a result, he even left a restraining order against one of their neighbors to Pamela, but he never filed the documents with the court. Daniel admitted that there had been difficulties with one local resident who did not like them. However, he managed to reach an agreement with this person after weeks of bickering, and the problems ended without filing a complaint. He kept the restraining order just in case something happened again. The check on this neighbor yielded no results, as he was away at the time of the attack and had a reliable alibi. He was subsequently excluded from the list of suspects. On the day Pamela was buried, a press conference was held, during which the police announced the arrest of the probable killer. It turned out to be a 16-year-old teenager named Scott Dileski, who was just 2 weeks away from his 17th birthday. He did not personally know Pamela's family, but the victim's husband, Daniel, had helped his mother, Esther Fielding, with paperwork. Scott's family was experiencing financial difficulties, so Daniel did not even take money for his assistance. This was the unexpected price for his kindness. Scott Dileski was born in San Francisco. Soon after his birth, his parents divorced, and Esther raised the boy. Quite quickly, she found a new partner and remarried. Scott claimed that his stepfather could be cruel, but his mother had never witnessed any such incidents. Information about the early years of his life is contradictory. Some claim his stepfather could indeed be cruel, while others deny it. There is also conflicting information about the mother's attitude towards her son. Despite the difficulties with the family, when his father offered for him to move in, Scott refused. Shortly before Pamela's murder, Esther got divorced again, leading to financial problems and an acute housing crisis. She and her son were left without a place to stay, and Esther desperately sought employment. But finding a job while dealing with housing issues proved difficult. Fortunately, friends extended a helping hand, offering to temporarily move in with them. Esther and Scott were offered to settle on a property in a trailer. In fact, the living conditions were modest, but they had no choice. During this period, Scott was going through a transitional phase, showing signs of rebelliousness. As a pleasant but peculiar young man, he had previously been a Boy Scout and a baseball player. Before moving, he had studied quite well. Coincidentally, a chain of tragic events had been triggered by the loss of a loved one. Shortly before the move, Scott's half-sister died in a car accident. This serious incident caused significant psychological distress for him. Many believe that his mother's indifference led to negative changes in his behavior, but she did not remain idle. She tried to support her family during that time. Scott became increasingly detached from society and closed off, exhibiting low energy. His behavior also took on some strange characteristics. For instance, he once drew a pentagram and danced around it. This was only an external manifestation of his problems, while those who constantly interacted with Scott did not notice any significant alarming changes in his behavior. He became increasingly immersed in dark thoughts and began to write disturbing poems, probably to attract his mother's attention. Esther was sure that her son simply exhibited quirks. She did not speak of him as a difficult child. She believed that Scott was going through a challenging period in his own way due to the death of his sister and the financial difficulties their family faced. Esther remembered how he previously could not even stand the sight of blood, but when the police first spoke to him, he claimed that at the age of 12, he had tried various illegal substances. Gradually, Scott showed an increasing interest in crime. He read a lot about serial killers and school shootings, spoke more often about these topics, showing an unhealthy fascination. Friends noticed that he was becoming increasingly distant. When detectives looked at Scott's computer, even more questions arose. They found very disturbing content, particularly concerning the practice of cutting up animals. One of Scott's friends, whom he met after the move, said that not long before Pamela's murder, they had decided to sell a truck, viewing it as the only way to improve their lives financially. The teenagers needed money. A solution was found quickly. They lived in a wealthy area, so they decided to put in some effort to earn the necessary amount. Scott, whose demeanor was becoming increasingly gloomy, decided to take the path of crime and rob a house, launching another chain of alarming events. Shortly before Pamela's death, a woman named Karen contacted the police. noting that a purchase she did not make had been charged to her credit card. An order from an online store was delivered to a nearby house where Esther and Scott lived. Someone from this household had purchased special lighting equipment for growing illegal plants. All of this led to Esther, as it was under her name that the suspicious order was made. However, Karen did not want to contact the police immediately. Esther was outraged by what she perceived as slander and believed that they were trying to put her in a bad light. Esther denied that she had ordered anything similar on the internet. However, the property owner suspected something was wrong and checked Scott's computer. Under pressure, Scott quickly confessed that he had come up with a fraudulent plan involving credit cards and that he had ordered the lighting fixtures. Soon after, Pamela died. In response to this incident, the parents of Scott's accomplice pressured him to confess to the scam, fearing that the young people could be involved in much more serious offenses. Maybe, the fraud involving the credit cards led to a robbery that ended in murder. His parents insisted that the accomplice go to the police station and confess everything. Interestingly, when he left the interrogation room, the detectives had in their hands a story that Scott had killed his neighbor. The young man who testified about all of this received immunity from prosecution for providing testimony. It was he who had pushed Scott into fraud and suggested that he engage in illegal activities. When the police came to arrest Scott, he was not at home. Esther was detained and admitted that her son was at a nearby location with his girlfriend. Less than an hour later, he was arrested along with Esther, who was also considered a participant. Esther and her son were held in custody for destruction of evidence and possibly for murder. Bail for Esther was set at $500. The suspicion against her arose from the story about a backpack that contained details of accounts and numbers of people from whom Scott had stolen money or planned to steal. Several people had already suffered due to the swindler. Esther's actions were viewed as criminal. The night after Pamela's murder, she contacted Scott to inform him of police activity in their area and asked him not to come home. Scott told her about the records and the backpack containing the data, asking her to throw it away, which she did. Esther insisted she was simply afraid for her son's safety. Scott was with his girlfriend, named Jenna Reddy. She later also ended up at the station, even testified against her boyfriend at the trial. She stated that he often talked about different ways of killing, for example, that shooting a person is less painful than beating them to death with a bat or stabbing them with a knife. According to Jenna, Scott often wondered how long it takes to beat someone to death and was obsessed with this topic. After the crime against Pamela, when they pressured Esther, she quickly agreed to cooperate with the authorities, receiving guarantees for protection from criminal prosecution. She denied any connection to her neighbor's murder. However, opinions about Esther were very conflicting. Some believed that she lived for her son, while her ex-husband did not share this belief. In any case, Esther changed her testimony, clearly trying to justify herself. Mainly, Esther talked about the backpack that she had thrown away. She did not know all the contents but believed they were unrelated to the murder. There was data on all the people who had become victims of Scott's fraudulent scheme. Esther helped find some items they had tried to destroy, including shoes and gloves that had blood stains on them. An examination showed that the items contained the blood of Pamela. Scott also left a shoe imprint at the crime scene, and samples of his DNA were found on Pamela's foot. In Scott's room, handwritten notes were discovered, some of which contained information about accounts of people who were likely to have been deceived by the same fraudulent scheme. In addition, there were plans to kidnap people. Apparently, Scott was ready to make money by any means, regardless of the seriousness of the crimes. There were also descriptions of how to get rid of evidence. All this confirmed the guilt of him. There were many coincidences. Even the symbol carved on the back of Pamela resembled the signatures that Scott used. A public defender was appointed at the beginning of the trial. However, there was also strong evidence against Scott that came to court. He was the complete opposite of his Gothic image during the investigation. All this was part of the defense attorney's strategy to humanize a dangerous killer in front of the jury in order to acquit him. According to Scott's version of events told before the trial, on the day of the murder, he decided to take a walk towards a local waterfall. He returned from this walk with serious injuries. According to him, while he was walking, he accidentally met a strange woman who attacked him, resulting in his injuries. By an amazing coincidence, she was Pamela, so the blood stains on both her and his clothes matched the DNA of the victim. He claimed that she had clawed his face, cut his wrist, and injured his hand. When he was arrested, the injuries were still fresh. Naturally, his story sounded unrealistic. Why would Pamela attack Scott at the waterfall? What happened to her afterward? How she ended up in the house, and who attacked her were all major questions. The evidence against Scott included all his browser queries related to animal cruelty, his obsession with crimes, plans for murder, material evidence, blood on items, confessions from friends of his girlfriend and her mother. The lawyer tried to highlight his best qualities and described him as a decent guy, but against the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecutor's office, it seemed futile. The only point that might have raised doubt, as stated by the lawyer, was the discovery of DNA samples. In addition to Scott's and Pamela's blood, traces of an unidentified person were found in the house. The defense attorney insisted that the detectives overlooked this evidence from the start and focused solely on proving Scott's guilt. The prosecution argued that the evidence against Scott was too substantial to be dismissed, while the evidence suggesting Scott's innocence was virtually insignificant. The jury went into deliberation to decide Scott's fate. It took them 18 hours to reach a decision, ultimately sparing him from the death penalty, as they chose to try him as a minor. It was assumed that he would serve the rest of his life in prison. Scott was found guilty of first-degree murder a month before the final round of hearings was held. Pamela's husband took the stand and stated that in his many years as a lawyer, he had represented at least 50 different murderers but had never seen a total lack of remorse like Scott's. Daniel believed that Scott had no redeeming qualities that would allow for parole eligibility. He deserved to be in prison for the rest of his life, and so it happened. Scott Dileski was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was to remain in a juvenile facility until he turned 18 and then be transferred to an adult prison. Immediately after Scott turned 18, he appealed to have his sentence reviewed, but his efforts were in vain. In 2009, Scott filed a claim that his rights had been violated. He wanted to change the venue of the hearing and claimed that some evidence which could refute the appeal was also rejected. The next attempt was made in 2011, where he pointed to evidence indicating the involvement of an unknown person in the murder, specifically claiming that the authorities did not even attempt to identify who owned all the DNA traces found in the trailer where Pamela died. He insisted that the nature of the crime indicated a personal motive. Scott himself allegedly did not know Pamela, and it made no sense for him to kill her, especially with such cruelty. Additionally, the detectives claimed that the criminal remained in the trailer for an extended period, consistent with the timeline, but Scott asserted that he had been at home during that time. Again, his arguments did not lead to any significant changes. Another appeal was filed in 2016, with Scott insisting that his life sentence was wrongful because he was a minor at the time of the crime. The appeal was accepted for consideration. During his imprisonment, state laws were revised to prohibit life sentences for minors without the possibility of parole, and he was automatically given the opportunity for early release after serving 25 years in prison. In 2030, Scott will have the chance to present his case for release. However, whether this release will be approved by the Commission remains uncertain. It is difficult to predict the outcome, but it is known that Scott became an exemplary prisoner. He did not drop out of school and continued to receive an education within the prison walls. Pamela's family stated that they would definitely be present at the parole board hearing to prevent him from being released, viewing him as an especially dangerous criminal. Daniel never finished building the house he dreamed of with his wife. He was forced to sell the land along with the partially built house because he simply wanted to forget everything that had happened and start life anew. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Shirley and Duguay. Choosing a soulmate is a very important step because this person can become the love of your life or a real nightmare. Shirley and Duguay was born on October 11, 1962. She was a native of Prince Edward Island, born and raised in the smallest of the Canadian provinces. Regarding her early years, she grew up in a close-knit family with two sisters. They had a loving father who supported them and was family-oriented, a value he passed on to his daughters. By 1994, Shirley was a 32 2-year-old mother of 5 children, 2 of whom were from previous relationships. However, she was going through a serious crisis with her husband, Douglas Beamish, with whom she had been in a relationship for several years. Shirley worked hard and devoted the rest of her time to her children. This was very helpful to her. She never lost faith in herself or people and maintained a positive attitude, constantly communicating with relatives and friends who supported her in every possible way. She truly needed that support as she barely managed to finalize her divorce proceedings with Doug. A dispute over custody of the children arose during their relationship, which had become increasingly oppressive. Shirley repeatedly complained that she was a victim of domestic violence. People in her close circle often saw traces of beatings on her. Despite the cruelty of the relationship, she rejected any proposals to separate, believing that her husband would simply kill her if she tried to leave. Even when Shirley reached a boiling point, her husband managed to keep her from getting a divorce. She was financially dependent on him, emotionally depressed, and simply afraid she would not be able to cope with the children without his support. Unfortunately, as they aged, his aggression began to shift toward the younger generation. At this point, Shirley sought support from the state to combat domestic violence. The Canadian justice system treated problems within the family with much less attention than the situation required. Despite numerous threats, statements, and evidence of aggression, Shirley failed to achieve any prohibitions or restrictions against Douglas. Finally gathering her strength, Shirley filed for divorce and moved out with the children. Now, the most pressing issue was the division of custody rights. During this period, she had 5 children aged 8 to 15. She feared for their health and safety given her husband's behavior. As a result, she sought sole custody of her 3 youngest children, fearing that Douglas would take revenge and shift his anger onto them. She intended to limit his opportunities for supervised visitations to no more than once a week. Additionally, she was counting on alimony because raising 5 children alone would be too challenging. Though she was already receiving small payments for 2 children from a previous relationship, it was not enough. Shirley's intentions only fueled Doug's anger. By the fall of 1994, she repeatedly expressed fears for her life. Yet, despite everything, she continued to hope for the best and led a normal life. On October 7, 1994, a woman found an abandoned car on Highway 169, near Tyne Valley in rural Prince Edward Island. She couldn't specify how long it had been there since she had been away from home for several days. Upon her return, she immediately noticed a car parked oddly in the middle of a field. When she approached to offer help to the driver, her worry grew. The car had no license plates, and on the windshield, there were numerous small splashes resembling blood. There was no one near the car, so she quickly contacted the police. Upon receipt of report, the law enforcement officers arrived at the scene and confirmed that something terrible had possibly happened in the car. Inside, they found many bloodstains but no signs of a struggle or dragging nearby, suggesting it had been abandoned far from where a confrontation had taken place. Investigators wondered if the victim of such an attack could have survived. Due to the lack of license plates, identifying the car took longer. Eventually, detectives discovered it belonged to 32-year-old Shirley Duguay. They tried to contact her, but to no avail, as her address was not known. They could only find her father and children. As it turned out, none of her relatives or friends had heard anything about her despite several police calls. Shirley had stopped responding to calls 4 days before the witness reported the abandoned car, approximately on October 3rd. It was normal for her to leave periodically for work, so during that entire time, no one suspected anything was wrong. No one could find the mother of the children, leading the police to begin a search operation, considering Shirley might be in danger. Given the amount of blood in the cabin, it was evident that the attack had been committed with great cruelty. This was also indicated by the nature of the splashes, which were analyzed by experts. Blood doesn't randomly splatter all over a cabin from random blows, it suggested a prolonged beating. Such behavior was atypical for either robbery or abuse, as typically, brutal criminals are well acquainted with their victims. Naturally, the immediate environment of Shirley was inspected, and everyone who knew Shirley pointed to her ex, husband, Doug. There were no other suspects, only he had issues with her. This man constantly beat her and threatened her. Investigators decided to interview Doug. He confirmed that he had a tense relationship with his wife but blamed her difficult character. He denied any accusations of domestic violence and cruelty on his part, accusing his wife of wanting to spite him after the divorce. Given the capabilities of forensic science in 1994, it was not possible to quickly determine the source of the blood found in the car. Doug behaved calmly, and there was no evidence linking him to the crime. Despite numerous witnesses believing him guilty, this was deemed insufficient. The main problem was the absence of a body. It remained unclear what happened to Shirley, so she was still considered missing. Days, weeks, and months passed. It became obvious to everyone that she was likely not alive, but the only suspect persisted. Authorities combed a vast area with a radius of tens of kilometers around where they found the abandoned car. The squad did manage to find valuable evidence, but no direct indications of Doug's involvement. Detectives interrogated him repeatedly again, but to no avail. When they compared the blood found in the car with samples from Shirley's relatives, they confirmed that the profiles matched, which meant the victim of the beating in the car, as expected, was Shirley. Interestingly, in addition to Shirley's blood, traces belonging to someone else were found inside the car. Analysis compared to Doug's blood showed that the additional blood belonged to him. However, without a body, even this evidence did not establish a direct link to the crime or elicit a confession from him. He insisted that the car was his, as Shirley had used it during their 15-year relationship, and he could have repeatedly injured himself inside it. It was impossible to calculate the exact time of his bloodstain's appearance. All of this caused bewilderment and discontent among the relatives of Shirley. The local community was also outraged because a dangerous person was walking free. Many believed in Doug's guilt. The Duguay family insisted that he was the only one capable of such cruelty. In the car, there were numerous splatters of blood, and experts indicated they resulted from medium force blows. However, the police were not sure if the criminal had used a weapon. The cushion on Shirley's seat was soaked in blood. She had used it to sit while driving. Being a petite woman, about 150 centimeters tall and weighing around 45 kilograms, she needed the cushion to control the vehicle effectively. The cushion had blood from two different sources mixed. About 1 kilometer from the abandoned car, they discovered a shovel with traces of blood and 2 black hairs. This evidence became the first valuable clue examined by forensic scientists in the laboratory. Microscopic analysis and comparison with the hairs found on Shirley confirmed they belonged to her. By this time, the search operation had been underway for more than a month. The most significant find was a thick plastic bag containing a pair of sports shoes and a leather jacket, both covered in blood. The items were located 2.5 kilometers from Shirley's car. The blood stain analysis confirmed they belonged to Shirley. However, the shoes and jacket were clearly not her size, were more consistent with a man's. When questioned about the sneakers and jacket, Douglas denied ever having worn anything like that. Unfortunately, there was once again no confirmation of this, as his blood was not found on the jacket or shoes. Detectives noticed that the sizes matched, but this was not enough to bring charges. The list of evidence included significant circumstantial evidence. It turned out to be a tough nut to crack, so more information was needed. The found shoes were sent to shoe expert Key Beadle. He knew well that each person wears shoes in their own way. Differences in shape, size, and structure of feet result in unique features in mechanics. Each person's gait is as unique as their fingerprints. If the shoes had been worn for a long time, this would affect the geometry and wear characteristics. Dr. Key began studying the marks left on the insole and the inner surface of the sole. As part of the investigation, a warrant was obtained to create casts of Douglas's feet. This became an important stage in the process. In parallel, the expert analyzed the condition of the insoles and soles of the discovered shoes, revealing that the criminal had a deformed big toe. A small, twisted print suggested that Doug had used them. Nevertheless, Doug continued to deny his involvement. Forensic experts placed great hopes on analyzing the jacket, which had peculiar fibers, including 20 thin white hairs. With this exception, no other evidence remained on the clothing. The forensic experts examined the fibers under a microscope and found that they resembled animal hair rather than human hair. The detectives were busy with the investigation, and one of them recalled an important detail. When he first came to speak with Doug at his home, he saw a white cat named Snowball. By connecting the owner of the jacket to the animal, they could potentially establish who owned the item of clothing. The police became convinced that these lint particles were left by the criminal's cat, which led to the key question of how to prove the criminal's guilt through his pet. The search began for an expert who dealt with such matters. Detectives made hundreds of phone calls and were amazed to find that such studies had not yet been explored in the history of criminology and forensic science. The closest researchers were pet experts studying their genes to combat diseases. Dr. Stephen O'Brien, a geneticist from the National Institute in the USA, spent decades studying hereditary diseases in cats, including cancer. He knew more about pet genetics than anyone else in the world. However, even he did not promise much. Comparing the DNA profile of Snowball with detected fibers was a unique task. First, it was necessary to obtain a blood sample from the cat, but the owner of the pet was not inclined to cooperate with the police. A significant amount of time was spent just catching the cat on the street and getting a blood sample. Finally, Dr. O'Brien received samples of Snowball's materials, including fur, which were transported almost under escort. Fortunately, many of these hair follicles were preserved, providing enough for a DNA profile comparison. Dr. O'Brien confirmed that the fibers belonged to the same animal. However, a new question arose. Prince Edward Island was nearly isolated, and the doctor had serious suspicions that many domestic cats lived there, which could mean they were all related. If this was indeed the case, then comparing DNA profiles could show a match with any two animals in the province, calling into question all the work done. The police were not planning to give up, so they decided to gather at least 24 blood samples from cats in the area, which would later be delivered to Dr. O'Brien's laboratory for analysis and comparison. This process took even more time, during which the dangerous criminal was still at large. When the report was finally ready, Dr. O'Brien confirmed that there was great genetic diversity among the cats on Prince Edward Island. Not a single pair of the 20 samples collected matched. This led to the conclusion that, apart from Snowball, only one of the 70 million cats could have owned this fur, which became a turning point that confirmed the white fur of the jacket belonged to Douglas's cat. Despite this evidence, Douglas continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the jacket and claimed he had no idea where his ex-wife was. More than 6 months passed, but the body of Shirley was still not found. 7 months after the disappearance of Shirley, a random fisherman was sailing along the river in Enmore. He noticed something suspicious in the bushes along the shore but could not see it clearly. So, he decided to swim closer. From a distance of several meters, he realized that the remains definitely belonged to a person, but the stature was so small that the fisherman initially thought it was a child. They was far from the city, so he thought that wild animals might have dragged someone's body away. He covered the remains with his raincoat and went towards the city to contact the police. When the authorities finally arrived, they saw the remains of a woman in a state of severe decomposition. The situation was not as dire as it could have been because the remains had not been exposed to extreme heat, which partially alleviated the decomposition situation. The examination confirmed that the body belonged to Shirley and Duguay. Although it was buried, the body surfaced due to abnormal weather conditions that made the coastal soil unstable, causing it to wash away. Despite the degree of decomposition, it was obvious that Shirley had been subjected to cruelty. The exact cause of death could not be established. There were several theories. One suggested that she had been strangled, while another proposed that she was beaten with a shovel, as the shovel was found earlier. However, it could not be ruled out that the blood stain on the shovel was made after Shirley's death. The killer might have accidentally caused damage when digging up the makeshift grave. Shirley's jaw had been beaten and was broken in 3 places, with one of her missing teeth found in her lungs. The situation had changed dramatically, and it remained to be understood what the motive was, making it possible to hold Douglas accountable. After the body was discovered, investigators decided to take a fresh look at the old evidence and re-examine the area around Shirley's house and car. This yielded important results. First of all, they discovered a letter that had been overlooked earlier, contained threats. Thanks to this letter, the motive for the murder was revealed. It turned out that immediately after Shirley filed for sole custody rights, Douglas wrote her a frightening note in which he said he would be happier to see her in the grave than to lose the children forever. This could have been a cruel joke if not for the alarming fact that this letter was written in her ex-husband's blood. Unfortunately, Shirley did not have time to disclose this, publicize it, or show it to the police, as the criminal carried out his sentence earlier. Additionally, in the house of Shirley, they found photographs showing Shirley and Douglas together. He in the image wore the very jacket from which the hairs of his cat were later found. Finally, a little more than a month after the murder, Douglas was arrested and placed under custody until the hearing began. On July 19, 1996, Douglas Beamish ended up in court, largely thanks to his cat, Snowball, who was instrumental in the pursuit of justice. Douglas was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. This case became the first in crime history where DNA and animal materials were used as evidence of a criminal's guilt. According to Dr. O'Brien, the day he began examining and comparing those white hairs marked the birth of veterinary forensic examination. In the following years, this practice was utilized many times and led to the imprisonment of several dangerous criminals. The center at the University of California, Davis, has used its methods in more than 500 cases over the past 15 years, confirming that the tools used to profile human DNA also work reliably on animals. Shirley's daughter, Shelley, grew up to become an advocate for abused women. She spoke about how, as a child, she watched her mother being beaten by her father. After his conviction, Douglas ended up in the Ontario Correctional Centre. In 1998 and 1999, he tried to appeal his conviction but was denied, as DNA evidence is considered irrefutable. In 2013, he first attempted to exercise his right to parole. However, he was again refused, as the commission ruled that the risk of committing another crime was too high. This was not the end of Douglas's story. After almost 25 years behind bars, discussions began about releasing the killer from prison under escort for 12 hours. Another meeting of the parole commission was held, during which relatives were present. Shirley's sister, Marie Arsenault, spoke out, stating that the murder of her sister had triggered a series of family tragedies. One sister became addicted to alcohol as a means of coping with the pain of loss. It spiraled out of control after Shirley's death. She died first due to health problems, and then her husband committed to end his own life because he could not cope with the death of his beloved wife, having tried to save her until the last moment. She insisted that if Douglas was released, he should be prohibited from living on Prince Edward Island. Shirley's father suffered a series of heart attacks after Marie spoke at the parole board meeting. Interestingly, during these hearings, Douglas took responsibility for Shirley's death for the first time. Prior to this, he had persistently denied his guilt. The commission determined that he still posed a high risk of reoffending, including crimes related to violence and cruelty. Despite finally admitting guilt and realizing the seriousness of his actions, it was believed that significant work still needed to be done before he was ready for full parole. Until that point, he had found it easier to blame others for what had happened than to face the truth. During his time in prison, Douglas suffered 3 heart attacks and kidney failure, nearly dying several times. He is currently serving his sentence in Dorchester Prison, having been transferred there a year before the hearing, during which he was granted a 12-hour escorted release. He expressed a desire to attend a rehabilitation center for ex-offenders convicted of serious crimes located in the Moncton area. Notably, the parole board noted 2 incidents demonstrating that he was not yet ready for life on the outside. In 2019, he threw a knife while preparing food in the kitchen of a minimum security correctional facility, and a year later, he went on a hunger strike, claiming dissatisfaction with the food provided by prison staff. Following the end of the meeting, a decision regarding Douglas Beamish's 12-hour temporary release was not established. He himself stated that he believed he was not ready for full release but wanted to visit a rehabilitation center in Moncton as he did not want to return to Prince Edward Island. It is worth noting that the Correctional Service of Canada had previously allowed him to be temporarily absent under escort for medical reasons and out of compassion. Both occasions took place without incident. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Michelle Lowe. In the San Diego, California area, Michelle Lowe lived with her family, which included her parents, her brother Michael. The house was always full of life and laughter. Michelle's mother worked as a nurse and inspired her daughter to follow in her footsteps. After her mother died, Michelle decided to finish what her mother had started and see it through to the end. She became a source of support for her family, learning to drive, cooking, and always giving advice. Michelle is a nursing student at Samuel Merritt University in Oakland and is interning at Kaiser Permanente Medical Center in Hayward. On May 27, 2011, after a long shift at the hospital, Michelle decided to quickly run to her car in the parking lot to get something. However, on her way to the car, she suddenly stopped, changed direction, and a few minutes later, a white Honda CR-V quickly drove out of the parking lot. When they began gathering all the students towards the end of her shift, Michelle was nowhere to be seen. Her personal belongings were left in the break room, her phone was not answering. This behavior was completely unlike her, and her instructor suspected something was wrong, so they immediately called the police. The next morning, 10 hours after Michelle's disappearance, there was still no news of her. Her brother and other relatives began searching for her, joining forces with the police and volunteers. Michelle's friends and colleagues came to the police station, clearly concerned about her disappearance. They insisted that her behavior had been too strange and that no one was willing to leave before a full investigation began. The officers quickly realized how serious the situation was. Traces of blood were found in the parking lot where her Honda had been parked. At about 9 a.m., they found her Honda CR-V itself. It was locked and neatly parked in a visitor spot near an apartment building just a kilometer from the hospital. Inside the car were her laptop and someone else's student ID from Sal Merritt University, which lay on the back seat. Michelle had no connection to the owner of the ID, and it remained unclear why it was there. Later, it was discovered that the card had been stolen a couple of days before Michelle's disappearance. Most likely, the attacker had stolen the ID to gain access to the building and possibly lured Michelle to the parking lot before disappearing with her in her own car. Detectives immediately understood that this was not the work of a random criminal, but someone who knew her schedule well. The theory that someone had simply attacked her randomly in the parking lot seemed unlikely. Hospital records showed that 30 minutes after Michelle walked into the parking lot, the emergency room received a call. At 7:30 p.m., the emergency department received a call. The caller introduced herself as Michelle and asked to speak to the teacher. The nurse who answered the call informed the caller that she would need to transfer the call to another department, but the caller insisted that the nurse not do so. She mentioned that she just wanted the teacher to know that Michelle had called to inform her that Michelle would not be able to come back that night because she had received a message that her father had had a heart attack. When Michelle's car was being towed away for further examination, her brother Michael unexpectedly received a message from her phone, "I'm fine." Then another message came, "I'm not missing. The phone is glitching and has erased all data." These messages drained the battery. Shortly afterward, friends began receiving strange messages, one after another, claiming that she had a flat tire, that she was back in Reno, that she needed a break from social media, and that she was not feeling well and wanted to rest. Michelle's ex-boyfriend noticed the activity on her phone and immediately wrote to her, but the reply was, "Who is this?" By May 31st, the reward for information on Michelle's whereabouts had increased to $20,000, and after a few days, it reached almost $100,000. The family hired a private detective, and more than 100 volunteers joined the search, dividing into 14 teams to cover an area of several kilometers. The reward continued to grow. During the investigation into Michelle's relationships, one interesting detail emerged. She had problems with an old friend named Giselle Daiwag Esteban. The girls had been close for many years and even went to college together. Giselle was dating a man named Scott, and they had a 6-year-old daughter. However, their relationship had ended on a bad note, which sparked the issues between Michelle and Giselle. Long before Giselle and Scott started dating, Michelle had gone on a couple of dates with Scott but quickly realized that they were better suited as friends. There was never any romance or intimacy between them. Despite this, Giselle became obsessively jealous. Her behavior grew increasingly strange, and her relationship with Michelle began to deteriorate. Michelle continued to be friends with Scott and refused to stop communicating with him just because Giselle wanted her to. She ignored Giselle's strange and obsessive claims. When detectives came to Giselle to ask her a few questions, she did not hide her obvious antipathy towards Michelle and didn't even try to pretend otherwise. Giselle asserting that she had long asked Michelle to stay away from her daughter and to stop communicating with their mutual friends. She described their relationship as torment, calling Michelle a best friend who cheated on her with her ex-fiancé. The detectives then found Scott, who honestly shared his version of events. They noticed that he was sincerely worried and even participated in the search for Michelle, attending meetings and vigils organized in her honor. Scott shared how Giselle behaved towards him and his family. At some point, when their relationship reached another crisis, he tried to improve his relationship with Giselle for the sake of their daughter. However, these attempts always ended in failure. He showed the detectives a long correspondence with Giselle, where she constantly mentioned Michelle and wrote increasingly aggressive messages, such as, "I hope you find that nasty." Giselle accused Michelle of destroying their family and threatened that she would soon become unnecessary. Giselle even sent messages directly to Michelle, insulting her and accusing her of ruining her family. Additionally, she followed Michelle to San Diego. Scott also showed the police a recording of one of Giselle's outbursts of rage. In the recording, she was sitting in a car with their daughter in the back seat. Giselle insisted that Scott be honest about Michelle and threatened to kill them both if he lied about his relationship with Michelle. She gave him what she called a last and final warning. Scott stated that Giselle was temporarily placed in a psychiatric clinic, where she was diagnosed with manic depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. After that, Giselle continued to come to Scott's house, sometimes even going inside and just sitting in a room until she was noticed. Scott was able to achieve complete custody of their daughter, which further angered Giselle, prompting her to move back to Hayward to be closer to them. Just 3 days before Michelle went missing, Scott filed for a temporary restraining order against Giselle, claiming that she had threatened him and his family. On the same day, he accused Giselle of breaking into his home and into their daughter's room. The police continued to review CCTV footage in the hope of obtaining clear images of Michelle's car. Her brother did not believe that his sister could simply get lost, as she always stayed in touch with the family and even reminded them to call their grandmother on Mother's Day. A reward for any information about Michelle's whereabouts continued to grow, and the search remained active. The police still hoped to find Michelle alive, but the evidence they gathered indicated that their chances were diminishing with each passing day. Their worst fears were confirmed when traces of Michelle's blood were found in her car. They called her family and informed them that the case was no longer being treated as a disappearance. Nevertheless, Michelle's family, determined to continue searching for her and hoping for the best, refused to believe the worst until there was definitive proof. Giselle remained the only suspect in the case, and the police invited her for a full interrogation. By that time, she was already pregnant with her second child. During the conversation, she admitted that she was indeed at the hospital the night Michelle went missing, supposedly for a routine medical examination. When asked about their friendship, Giselle referred to Michelle as her sister but noted that their relationship had deteriorated due to a mistake made by Michelle and Scott. Giselle was released, but the police continued to monitor her, even installing a tracker on her car. Investigators believed she was connected to Michelle's disappearance, but they doubted whether she had acted alone due to her petite stature of only 158 centimeters. In the meantime, the police stepped up their investigation. They questioned Giselle's neighbors, who confirmed that Giselle and Michelle had been friends. Giselle told the press that she had nothing to do with Michelle's disappearance. Even her father joined the search for Michelle, flying in from Vietnam and calling on all local residents to help. An interesting turn of events occurred when Scott called the police and reported that he had found Michelle's phone in the back of his mother's car. Everything indicated that Giselle had planted it, since the tracker on her car showed that she had driven up to Scott's house several times. Security at the medical college where Michelle studied analyzed the data from the stolen student card, which had been used to access the building on May 26, the day before Michelle's disappearance. The cameras recorded Giselle. She had figured out the network technology and gained access to the card, stating that she was interested in enrolling. After receiving the card, Giselle began checking door locks, entering various classrooms, and inspecting the teacher's desk, where she found a student schedule, one of which belonged to Michelle. Now knowing the exact time when Michelle was supposed to be at college the next day, Giselle left the building. Analysis of phone data showed that on the day of her disappearance, Michelle and Giselle were in the same place at the same time. The next day, Giselle went into the Apple store and asked to unlock the iPhone, explaining to the technician that her daughter had accidentally locked her phone. After successfully unlocking it, Giselle left and went to Chuck E. Cheese, where cameras caught her texting. At the same time, Michelle's friends started receiving strange and obviously fake messages, which were confirmed by cell phone towers as coming from Michelle's phone. Despite there being no body, the police already had enough evidence to arrest Giselle Esteban for murder. When she was arrested at the front door of her home, a pair of shoes with Michelle's blood on the soles were also found in Giselle's car, along with a lock of Giselle's hair and her DNA on the steering wheel. Giselle had searched the internet for information on how to cause a heart attack without a trace, follow a person without being caught, and how to pick locks. She also searched for information on toxic gases such as potassium chloride and carbon monoxide. After Michelle went missing, her name was entered into the search bar more than 300 times. 10 days after Giselle's arrest, Michelle's remains were found in a shallow grave in a remote area, about 20 kilometers from Giselle's home. 3 months had passed, and the body was badly decomposed, so the exact cause of death could not be determined. The Alameda County coroner confirmed the identity of the remains in September 2011. Giselle Esteban appeared in court. She pleaded not guilty, claiming that the murder was an accident caused by a moment of anger and that Michelle allegedly provoked her. Her lawyer tried to prove that it was not a premeditated murder but one of chance. However, Giselle herself did not testify and appeared absolutely emotionless in court, without expressing a drop of remorse. Prosecutors assumed that Giselle had planned the attack in advance. She had tracked down Michelle, studied her schedule, waited for her to come out to the parking lot, and then attacked her with a sharp object. This explained the traces of blood, how she could load Michelle's body into the car and take it away. The prosecutor called Giselle a sociopath, noting her coldness and calculation. He emphasized that this was a carefully planned attack on a person who did not even suspect the danger. Giselle Esteban was found guilty of first-degree murder. She did not react to the verdict and left the courtroom in silence. At his sentencing hearing on December 10, Esteban was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the right to parole. Michelle's family was disappointed. They had hoped for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. With such a sentence, they would be forced to attend a parole hearing when she files the appropriate petition. Michelle's brother, Michael, was deeply distressed by the loss. He recalled how his sister had planned to follow in their late mother's footsteps and become a nurse to help people. For the family, the loss of Michelle was immense, and to this day, they hope that justice will prevail. Nothing can bring back their beloved sister and daughter. Michelle's dream of becoming a nurse and following in her mother's footsteps was cut short when Giselle killed her in the parking lot of a Bay Area hospital. It was a fit of jealousy when Giselle mistakenly thought that Michelle had started dating her boyfriend. Michelle's family plans to actively participate in the hearings to remind the judges how cruel this case is and to show how tragic their sister's fate is. The judge noted that in order to be released early, Giselle would have to show sincere remorse, which was not observed from her at the time of the trial. Shortly after her arrest, Giselle gave birth to a boy, who was handed over for adoption. There were rumors that Scott might have been the father, but he denied it, and the real father's name was never revealed. Lee's family continued to volunteer, helping other families dealing with missing loved ones and raising awareness of such cases. Michael said he was sure his sister was now in heaven with their mother, helping him come to terms with his loss and be less afraid of the future. Michelle's father has always been proud of her diligence and busy life, but admits that he has never asked her to spend Father's Day with him. Now he regrets and dreams of turning back time, even just for one day, to invite her to enjoy this vacation together. After the trial, Michelle's family did not stop fighting for justice. They decided to direct their pain and anger toward creating an organization in her honor. The Michelle Lowe Foundation has become an important platform for helping families who have lost their loved ones and for those looking for missing relatives. They have organized annual events and fundraisers supporting search services, began advising other families, teaching them how to act correctly in the first hours after the disappearance of loved ones. Every year on Michelle's birthday, her friends, family, and those who were helped by the foundation gather together to remember her bright personality. It became not just a day of mourning but a celebration of her life, a day of support and love. People bring flowers and launch white balloons into the sky, symbolizing hope and memory. Scott, who was drawn into this terrible story, also took part in the work of the foundation. He decided to change his life and devote himself to raising his daughter. He actively participated in activities so that others would not face such a tragedy. As for Giselle, her chances for early release were minimal. Even after a while, her refusal to repent and emotional indifference made her a symbol of the destructive influence of hatred and envy. The story of how jealousy and unfounded suspicions can destroy lives became an important lesson for many, especially for those who suffer from toxic relationships and mistrust. Ultimately, despite all the tragedy, Michelle's light continued to illuminate the path for others. Her story and memory became a source of strength and inspiration, reminding everyone that love and compassion are stronger than hatred and jealousy. Let's head over to the small, quiet town of Malang in North Cotabato, Philippines. It's a place known for its calm vibe and rural charm, where life moves at a slower pace. The people here are deeply connected to the land, relying on agriculture for their livelihood. In this peaceful town lived the Magwad family. Unlike many others, they led a pretty stable life. Cruz Magwad, the father, was an elementary school teacher who was well respected and loved by everyone, often being praised for his hard work. His wife, Lovella, was the principal at the same school. Together, while they didn't make a lot of money, they were considered one of the more privileged families in town. Their youngest child, Criziel Lewis, was 16 years old. He dreamed of becoming a lawyer even at such a young age and was determined to work hard to achieve that goal. Besides being intelligent, he was also creative, playing guitar, drawing, and reading in his spare time. His older sister, Criziel Gwyn, was the more intense one, super smart, driven, and goal-oriented. She had always been that way as a kid, being a Girl Scout with a sash covered in so many badges that there was no room for more. Gwyn didn't stop there. She enrolled in a pre-med program during high school and planned to become a doctor. By all accounts, Gwyn was the type of person who would sit with you at a party if you were feeling shy, sticking by your side until you felt at ease. That's how she met 17-year-old Janice Sebiel. However, unlike Gwyn and Lewis, Janice's childhood was far from happy. She wasn't privileged enough to attend school and had to work from a very young age. Even worse, she grew up without parents. Her first real memories began around the age of 8. Before that, everything was a blur. She only recalls being found by a stranger wandering alone on a huge shipping container boat. Her parents were nowhere to be found, and Janice believed they had abandoned her. A stranger was kind enough to post her picture and name online in an attempt to find her parents. They shared her story on Facebook and various online forums, but no one ever came forward. Eventually, Janice was dropped off at the Philippine version of Child Protective Services, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, where she moved from one foster home to another. Not long after, Janice was offered a live-in nanny job by a family. Though she hated the job, she was incredibly grateful for the opportunity. Janice shared all of this with Gwyn, and Gwyn was so deeply moved by her story that an idea began to form in her mind, an idea that could give Janice the safe, loving home she deserved: adoption. Together with Lewis, Gwyn decided to present this idea to their parents. Like a well-thought-out thesis, they approached the subject with serious dedication, explaining that adopting Janice wouldn't just change her life, it would help their family too. They convinced their parents that Janice could pitch in with the chores around the house, which was a significant consideration in their Asian family culture. It wasn't uncommon for children to share the responsibility of washing dishes, cleaning, and cooking. With one more set of hands to help, the family would run more smoothly. Gwyn's parents weren't exactly rolling in money, but they believed in teaching responsibility. The kids had chores, had to keep their grades up, and attended church every Sunday. They were strict, but it was out of love. Gwyn and Lewis respected that. In 2021, Janice moved in, and it was like she was instantly part of the family. The Magwad welcomed her with open arms. Lewis even gave up his own room so Janice could have a more comfortable one. They enrolled her in school right away, and for the first time, Janice didn't have to wake up with the constant worry of finding food or going to work. She was finally allowed to be a kid. As Janice settled into her new life, the bond between the three siblings grew stronger by the day. We could see the happiness shining through, especially in the videos they posted on TikTok. Janice even got to experience a family vacation for the first time, something she had always dreamed of. Laughter filled the air as they explored new places together, creating memories she would cherish forever. For once, Janice felt like she belonged to something bigger, something safe and full of love. But just when everything seemed perfect, Janice's world was about to shatter. On December 10th of that same year, she posted a series of statuses on Facebook claiming that she and her siblings were under attack. It was just days before Christmas, a time that should have been filled with joy. Instead, it marked the beginning of a nightmare. At that time, Mr. Cruz, their father, was at school doing some chores related to the upcoming holiday, while Lovella, their mother, was away on a work trip. Everything changed when Mr. Cruz received a phone call that left him frozen in terror. The voice on the other end told him that their home was being ransacked, and his children were inside. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Cruz finally arrived at the house. It was eerily silent outside the front door. His eyes locked onto a blood-soaked blanket on the ground with a knife nearby. He called out for his kids, but there was no response. He moved quickly to the back door and managed to find a way inside. Cruz moved rapidly through the house, his voice echoing off the walls as he searched for his children. When he entered the living room, that a horrifying sight met his eyes. There, lying on the floor, was his daughter Gwyn. A towel soaked in blood was wrapped around her body, her limbs and torso were covered in multiple slash wounds. But it was the injuries on her neck that were particularly severe. Crime scene photos later revealed the gruesome extent of the wounds. Her flesh was torn apart, and ants had already begun to gather on her body. Not far from Gwyn, near the main door, Cruz found Lewis. His hands and feet were bound, and a gag covered his mouth. His body was riddled with fresh stab wounds, and the amount of blood suggested that the attack had happened just moments before Cruz arrived. But there was one more person missing. Janice's heart pounded as Cruz continued to search the house, calling her name. Finally, Janice appeared. She emerged from her room, her hair wet and her face pale and shaken. She was in shock, barely able to speak. Seeing her, Cruz immediately called the police. The officers arrived soon after, stepping into a crime scene that would later be described as one of the most gruesome in the Philippines. Blood pooled on the floor, and the house bore the marks of extreme violence. Janice, while trembling, told the officers that they had been attacked. The house was in disarray, cabinets had been pried open and personal belongings were scattered across the rooms. At first glance, it seemed like a robbery. However, investigators knew that appearances could be deceiving. They needed to confirm whether anything valuable had been taken to solidify the robbery theory. At the same time, as part of their protocol, the police did not rule out the parents as persons of interest. The police needed to confirm their alibis and whereabouts during the attack. The investigators turned their attention to the room where Janice said she was hiding during the attack. It was messy, but that wasn't unusual for a robbery scene. What stood out, though, were the details that didn't add up. The disarray in the room, though chaotic, didn't have the usual signs of a real robbery. So the police began to search the house more carefully, and they soon found some crucial evidence just outside the front door. The police discovered a blood-stained shirt, which they believed had been dropped by the attacker while trying to escape. About 100 meters away, they found a plastic bag in a ditch. Inside were bloody pants and underwear. It seemed the attacker had deliberately discarded these items to hide evidence. Inside the house, the scene became increasingly horrifying. The living room floor was littered with shards of glass and broken bottles, a clear sign of the violence that had unfolded there. Expansive pools of blood reveal the brutal nature of the attack. Among the carnage, investigators discovered a discarded knife, a baseball bat, and a hammer, each stained with blood. These weapons were assumed to have been used in the murders. Crime scene analysts took careful note of the blood patterns, which provided key insights into the sequence of events. They determined that Gwen, the older sibling, had likely been killed first. Her blood had partially coagulated and rigor mortis had already begun to set in. In contrast, Lewis's blood appeared much fresher, suggesting he had been murdered after Gwen. The different states of the blood and bodies made this theory even more plausible. Lewis's hands and feet were bound, while Gwen's were not. This discrepancy indicated that Gwen might have been ambushed and killed quickly, while Lewis was restrained, likely to prevent him from resisting before his own murder. The fact that so many different tools were used and that the victims had distinctive types of wounds strongly suggested the involvement of more than one attacker. This theory was supported by the fact that Lewis had been restrained. It would have been difficult for a single person to control a victim while also carrying out such a brutal attack. Adding to the mystery, crews confirmed that the weapons found at the scene were his. The murderers seemed to have used tools that were readily available in the house, which made the crime even more unsettling. As investigators continued to gather evidence, they found something that stood out. The family's laundry machine had been used, but there were no freshly washed clothes anywhere in the house. This odd discovery suggested that something unusual had happened after the crime, perhaps an attempt to erase evidence or cover their tracks. The extreme brutality of the crime prompted local authorities to launch a manhunt for the suspects. The public was shocked, and the need for justice became urgent. To help with the investigation, the vice of the Municipal Council of Mlang, North Cotabato announced a reward of 200,000 pesos for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The mayor also offered an additional 50,000 pesos as a bounty. These actions emphasized the gravity of the case and the community's desperate need for answers. Autopsies were performed on Gwen and Lewis over 2 days, starting on December 13, 2021, and the results were chilling. Gwen had sustained 32 stab and slash wounds, some of which were deep enough to almost sever her limbs. One of her ears had been cut off, and her neck and upper arm were nearly severed. Her body also showed signs of blunt force trauma, likely caused by the hammer and baseball bat found at the scene. Additionally, the backs of her hands were bruised, covered in defensive wounds, indicating that she had fought fiercely. Meanwhile, Lewis had endured 51 knife wounds, some so deep that they exposed his bones and internal organs. Red marks on his neck suggested he may have been strangled. Unlike his sister, Lewis had no defensive wounds. He also had signs of blunt force trauma on his limbs and torso. All these injuries were consistent with the weapons recovered at the scene. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. Though the rooms appeared ransacked, only Gwen's phone was missing. Nothing else of value had been taken, leading authorities to believe that the killer or killers were familiar with the victims. It was also striking that the crime took place in broad daylight, which made the entire situation even more unsettling. Before the autopsy results were made public, rumors began circulating online accusing Janice of being involved in the crime. These rumors gained traction due to her survival, the weapons being from the family home, and the locked front door. The accusations grew increasingly intense, with some even threatening Janice. Under the mounting pressure, the police decided to question her. Janice described the events of that day. She had been studying with Gwen in her bedroom while Lewis was downstairs in the living room. Suddenly, they heard screams, and 3 men broke into the house. The 2 girls rushed downstairs and saw the 3 men attacking Lewis with the weapons found at the scene. The attackers then turned on Gwen. In fear, Janice fled upstairs, locked herself in her bedroom, and hid under the bed. Janice was too scared to call the police, so instead, she texted the family group chat asking for help. Later, she messaged her adoptive mom saying, "Mom, help." When no one saw those messages, Janice went a step further and posted on social media, saying, "Help. Somebody has broken into the house. I don't want to die. I'm hiding in my room. Help." After a few minutes, she deleted the post, worried the attackers might see it and come after her. By the time someone saw the post and reached out to her mom, Janice was too scared to pick up. She even changed her social media username and put her phone on silent, clearly trying to hide. When the house finally fell silent, Janice emerged from her hiding place, too afraid to go downstairs. She claimed she took a shower and changed clothes to calm herself, finishing just as Cruz arrived home. However, there was something odd about this part of the story. Janice had told the police she locked herself in her bedroom the moment the attack began, so why did her room look like it had been ransacked? That raised serious questions. More importantly, Janice's version of events was directly at odds with the forensic evidence. The autopsy results and the way the injuries were distributed made it clear that Gwen was the first victim, not Lewis. This major discrepancy between Janice's account and the evidence made investigators even more suspicious. Something wasn't adding up, and they started to take a closer look at Janice's statements. At first, she told the police her phone was off during the attack, but Cruz remembered calling her phone and hearing it ring with no answer. When Janice was confronted with this, she changed her story again, now claiming that she had been in the shower and hadn't heard her phone ringing. This was starting to sound suspicious. But that wasn't the only thing that raised eyebrows. Cruz also revealed some information about the murder weapons that added fuel to the fire. The baseball bat used in the attack originally belonged to Lewis. He had kept it in his room on the top bunk as a kind of protection. However, after being adopted by Cruz, Janice had taken over the top bunk. The hammer used in the attack was another tool that Cruz kept around for home repairs. He was very careful about where he stored it, usually hiding it behind the washing machine. Cruz mentioned that only 3 people knew exactly where that hammer was: himself, Gwen, and Janice. This meant that the killer or killers had to have known the family's routines and possessions very well, almost as if they had been living in the house with them. Things became even more suspicious when a delivery driver came forward. The driver had arrived at the house just 18 minutes before Cruz was contacted by a neighbor who noticed that no one had answered the door. The driver kept calling out, hoping someone would respond. Eventually, he noticed a woman peering at him through a door before she suddenly walked away. The woman's identity was never confirmed, but it raised serious doubts about where Janice was and what she was doing during the attack. At the crime scene, it had been locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. This was significant because it meant that whoever had done this was likely someone familiar with the house, someone who had access to a key and could lock the door after the crime. At this point, it was pretty clear that Janice had something to do with the murders. However, since Janice was only 17 years old, still a minor. Under Philippine law, the police couldn't arrest her without solid proof. This legal issue made them tread carefully, as they couldn't move forward with an arrest until they had more definitive evidence. Rather than arresting her immediately, the authorities placed Janice under the care of the Social Welfare Department while they investigated who had actually committed the murders. If Janice's claim about other people being involved was true, the police had a considerable amount of work ahead of them. 5 days after the murders, a significant breakthrough occurred. The police discovered Janice's fingerprints on the murder weapons. This was a huge deal, but it wasn't the smoking gun. After all, Janice had lived in the house where the weapons were stored, so her prints could have been there simply from handling them. Still, it was a lead they couldn't ignore. To ensure she wasn't treated unfairly, Janice was given a lawyer by the Social Welfare Department. However, things took another unexpected turn when Lovella, Janice's adoptive mother, found a contact tracing form while searching Janice's room for clues. To her surprise, it wasn't Janice's form, it belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Esmeraldo Aldo Cano Jr. Aldo was a sacristan at a local church, and Janice had known him from the orphanage. This discovery sent the police scrambling to determine if Aldo had anything to do with the murders. Soon enough, witnesses came forward confirming that Aldo had been near the crime scene on the day of the killings. One woman stated she saw Aldo drop Janice off near the house right before the murders, and another neighbor said she saw him asking for directions to the house that morning. When shown a picture of Aldo, the woman immediately recognized him. Then, on December 16th, 6 days after the murder, Janice, with her lawyer present, gave a full confession. She admitted to being involved in the murders along with Aldo. Janice explained that her motive stemmed from deep resentment and jealousy. She felt that Gwyn and Lewis were receiving all the love and attention from their parents. In her mind, they were standing in the way of her getting the affection she had longed for. She even confessed that killing them would leave her as the only child in the family, guaranteeing that she would get all the love and attention she had recently started receiving after being adopted. Janice revealed that her ultimate goal was to take Gwyn's place in the family, driven by years of emotional neglect in the orphanage where she had grown up. By December 18th, Janice's confession was officially recorded, although it was inconsistent, much like many of her previous statements. The police tracked down Aldo, who voluntarily surrendered, admitting his role as well. Forensic analysis later confirmed that blood found on discarded clothing in a ditch belonged to Aldo. Like Janice, Aldo was also a minor, so he was placed under the care of the Social Welfare Department. Later that same day, in an unrelated banned substance raid, police arrested a 17-year-old for possession of illegal substances. When they searched his phone, they found something that tied him to the case: Gwyn's stolen cell phone. The serial number confirmed it had been taken after the murders. The police pieced it together. Janice had enlisted Aldo to sell the phone because she couldn't get rid of it herself. Unfortunately, the phone had been water-damaged, making it impossible to retrieve any useful data. The boy who had the phone wasn't involved in the murders, he had simply bought it from Aldo. Because Janice and Aldo were minors, the police couldn't release any juicy details about their confessions to the public, despite the parents pressing for information. As the investigation progressed, Janice stopped cooperating, making it even harder to figure out exactly what had happened. Some people believe Janice's confessions weren't even the full story. Whispers circulated that the murders were even worse than she had let on, like the possibility that Lewis was tied up and forced to watch as his sister was murdered before he was killed as well. After the shocking confessions, Lovella, the siblings' mother, was interviewed and reflected on the warning signs she had missed. According to Lovella, they had adopted Janice 5 months before the murders. At first, everything seemed fine, the family welcomed her, and she appeared grateful. However, soon small red flags began to show. In August 2021, when Gwyn's parents were hospitalized, Cruz noticed that 10,000 pesos, about $170, set aside for emergencies was missing. Janice claimed thieves had taken it, but the next day a large sum was found hidden in her school bag. After some questioning, Janice admitted she had taken the money. Despite this breach of trust, the family, particularly Gwyn, chose to forgive her. They were sympathetic to her troubled past, attributing the theft to the survival instinct she had developed after years of hardship. Janice apologized, and the family, hoping this was a one-time mistake. They accepted her apology, believing the worst was behind them. However, as months passed, Janice's behavior started to shift in unsettling ways. She became lazy, irresponsible, neglecting household chores and showing a disregard for reminders. She apologized but never followed through. Although troubling, it didn't raise any immediate alarms until the morning of the murders. On that day, Janice did something she had never done before. She called Cruz and Lovella mom and dad for the first time. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a red flag, indicating a deeper, darker shift in her emotional state. It was as if something had clicked in her mind, setting in motion what was about to happen. As the investigation unfolded, more shocking truths came to light. Janice had lied about her origins from the start. Her story of being an orphan was a fabrication. Her parents were alive and had spent years desperately searching for her. When the case went viral, Filipino amateur sleuths dug into her past and uncovered a nearly decade-old missing persons notice. Her parents weren't very active on Facebook back then, so they missed the post. Fast forward to the murders, and that same post started circulating online again. It didn't take long for Janice's biological parents to recognize her. Born in 2005, Janice was the youngest of 3 children, but her childhood was filled with chaos. Her father's gambling addiction tore the family apart, and after remarrying, her mother tried to make the best of the situation by dividing what little they had left among her children. Eventually, Janice and her siblings were placed in different orphanages. By 2020, Janice had actually reunited with her biological family, but that reunion didn't last long. Her relatives later claimed she cut them off, saying they were too poor to be of any use to her. This betrayal shocked everyone. Things took a darker turn when Janice's biological mother, devastated by what her daughter had done, attended the funeral of Gwyn and Lewis. In her grief, she kept apologizing, overwhelmed with guilt about her daughter's actions. In one heartbreaking moment, Janice's biological mother even knelt down, but the Magwad weren't seeking revenge. They made it clear that they weren't angry, only seeking justice. They insisted that Janice's biological mother encourage her daughter to confess. Janice's mother tried to visit Janice at the social welfare office, but Janice refused to see her, citing strict rules. Then, the investigation took a jaw-dropping turn when evidence surfaced suggesting the murders were premeditated. Screenshots of a conversation between Janice and an unknown person went viral. In the messages, Janice confessed that she wanted to kill her siblings, thinking their deaths would give her the freedom she craved. She even wondered if anyone would still accept her if she committed murder, expressing a chilling belief that no matter what she did, God would forgive her if she asked. Some sources claim that Janice often talked about the 2009 horror movie The Orphan, a film about a young girl adopted by a family who ultimately betrays and kills them. She even posted on Facebook that she loved the movie and watched it repeatedly. When Janice's trial began, her behavior was just as disturbing. She was seen smiling and laughing in court, showing no remorse or regret. Cruz and Lovella, devastated by the loss of their children, said in interviews that they might have forgiven Janice if she had shown even a hint of genuine remorse, but her coldness only deepened their pain. The case became a national sensation in the Philippines. From March 2022, when Janice and Esmeralda were officially charged with murder, to their conviction on May 17, 2022, the case was closely followed by the public. Janice Sibiel was sentenced to 31 years in prison, while Esmeralda Cano Jr. received a 29-year sentence. However, both sentences came with one condition: they would serve them under the supervision of the Department of Social Welfare and Development until their 21st birthdays, after which they would be transferred to adult prisons. Gwyn and Lewis's parents had mixed feelings about the trial's outcome. While they recognized that the courts handed down the toughest punishment possible under the law, they felt the laws were too soft. The biggest issue, however, was Janice's complete lack of remorse. Cruz and Lovella were outspoken against Republic Act 9344, which limits the legal accountability of minors. According to this law, the minimum age for criminal liability is 15, and individuals between the ages of 15 and 18 can be held accountable but are sent to youth centers or rehab programs instead of adult prisons. This law prevents minors like Janice from being tried as adults, even for heinous crimes. Many argued that kids shouldn't be capable of planning or committing such brutal acts. In the US and other countries, minors committing these kinds of crimes would have been tried as adults. Cruz and Lovella felt strongly that Janice's age shouldn't excuse her from taking full responsibility, especially for such a violent and premeditated crime. This view was shared by many who felt the law was too lenient in cases like this. They publicly called for changes to the law, wanting those who commit violent acts at a young age to be held fully accountable. Some of the most heartbreaking facts to come out of the investigation revealed that Gwen almost escaped. She had the chance to run, but when she heard Lewis calling for help, she went back, hoping to save her brother. Katrina Wright's brow was originally from Germany. There, she met an American serviceman named Charles, and they fell in love and got married. After their wedding, Charles brought Katrina to the United States, where they settled in a small town called Ayer, Massachusetts, which had around 5,000 residents. Together, they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. After leaving the military, Charles worked at a local factory that made knives and surgical instruments, providing for the family while Katrina stayed at home as a housewife. Katrina and Charles enjoyed a long life together filled with happy moments. As their children grew up and started their own lives, Katrina remained active, social, and energetic. When her children visited on weekends, she joyfully danced and had fun with her daughter. It was often hard to find her at home. In contrast, Charles was quiet, reserved, and calm. In 1980, Katrina was on the verge of realizing her long-held dream. She wanted to return to Germany to see how her home country had changed and to visit relatives and friends with whom she had kept in touch through letters over the years. To make this trip possible, she saved money for a long time but was so anxious about the possibility of her savings being stolen that she carried a large amount of cash in an envelope with her everywhere she went. This included outings to local restaurants with friends and family. When they learned about her money-carrying habit, they were surprised and often questioned her reasoning. It seemed odd to them that Katrina wasn't afraid to walk around with so much cash, especially since it posed a risk to her safety. However, Katrina believed that leaving the money at home unattended was even riskier. She felt that if she kept cash, her travel savings would be safe. At 48 years old, she truly thought her concerns were unfounded, at least until May 21, 1980. On that day, as usual, Charles left for work around 7 a.m., while Katrina stayed home a bit longer before heading to her job. However, by 10 a.m., her colleagues began to worry because she had not arrived at work. This was unusual for her. They attempted to call her, but she didn't answer. They also couldn't reach Charles, as he was out of contact during his shift, and mobile phones had not yet been invented. To save time, her colleagues began contacting the couple's closest relatives whose phone numbers they had. They were able to reach the daughter-in-law who lived next door to Katrina. She agreed to check on Katrina. At 10:45, she went to the address. She knocked on the door and windows several times, but there was no response. Her calls went unanswered, and the windows were tightly covered. When she tried to get inside, she found the front door was unlocked. As soon as she opened the door, it was clear that a struggle had occurred in the house. In the kitchen, she found Katrina lying on the floor, bleeding and unresponsive. The room showed signs of a violent confrontation, with furniture, appliances, and books scattered all around. The sink was soaked with water and blood, creating a horrifying scene. The daughter-in-law immediately called 911 for help, hoping that Katrina could be saved. However, she was too scared to remain in the house and waited for emergency responders outside. Paramedics quickly arrived at the house but were unable to save Katrina, who had already died. Detectives were immediately on the scene to investigate the crime. It became clear that the likely killer knew Katrina, as evidenced by the violence of the attack and the fact that the windows and locks were undamaged. This suggested that Katrina either let the attacker in willingly or he had a key. The assault took place in the kitchen, where the attacker used water to wash something in the sink, likely his hands or face. The kitchen remained messy, with blood and water splattered around. A faint fingerprint was discovered on the screen, while a clearer print was found on a toaster lying on the floor. Additionally, several hairs were found clutched in Katrina's fist, likely pulled from the attacker during a struggle. Unfortunately, DNA analysis techniques were still in their infancy at that time, so investigators could only collect and store the evidence for future analysis. Forensic scientists focused on the fingerprints they found. An expert determined that Katrina had been attacked multiple times. The suspected murder weapon, a paring knife, was discovered in the trash under the sink. The murder occurred in the kitchen, and it was clear that the house had been ransacked. The victim, Katrina, had her jewelry stolen, along with an envelope containing money she had saved for a trip back to her homeland. Initially, law enforcement believed the motive behind the crime was the stolen money. However, Katrina was determined to keep her savings, which led her to fight back against the robber, resulting in her tragic death. The numerous stab wounds also suggested a possible personal motive. Investigators looked into Katrina's personal life but found no one who could commit such a violent act. She did not have any obvious enemies and was not vocal about having money in her home, with only her closest friends knowing about her savings. This limited circle led them to suspect her husband, Charles. They theorized that the murder might have taken place before he left for work around 7 a.m. Evidence linked the murder weapon, a knife, to Charles, as it was produced by the company where he worked. He acknowledged that this knife was often used in their kitchen. While many residents owned similar knives, the knife in question had been thoroughly cleaned, which raised suspicions. During the interrogation, Charles expressed deep sorrow over his wife's death. He had been married to her for decades and appeared genuinely grief-stricken. Still, the fact that the perpetrator used a kitchen knife instead of a premeditated weapon was unusual for such a crime. Despite his apparent distress, Charles was subjected to a polygraph test, which he passed. In addition to the numerous stab wounds, Katrina had suffered a blow to the head from a blunt object, likely a lamp found broken near her body in the kitchen. Ultimately, with the collection of fingerprints and blood samples from the scene and after questioning Charles, the police decided to send him home. From the beginning, he was hesitant to go home because it reminded him of the tragedy. In 1980, there were no specialized companies for crime scene cleanup, so he had to rely on his relatives for assistance. Consequently, Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law ended up cleaning the kitchen and removing blood from various surfaces. They also expressed their concerns to the authorities, who believed that Katrina's attacker might have been someone she knew personally. To understand what happened, they explored various possibilities. During their conversations, they recalled a 25-year-old man named Kenneth Walters. Born on August 16, 1953, Kenneth was 26 at the time of the crime. He comes from a large, troubled family. He lives near Katrina, and some of his relatives are facing legal troubles. Kenneth himself had a history of minor criminal offenses. Before reaching adulthood, he had been arrested for participating in a knife fight. Since it was his first offense, he received a fine and was required to perform community service. A few weeks prior to Katrina's death, Kenneth had attacked law enforcement officers. Although a trial was scheduled for the day she was murdered, he was released on bail beforehand. Kenneth worked as a cook at a restaurant that Katrina frequently visited to spend time with her friends and family. While she did not interact with him directly, he might have learned about her possessing a large sum of money, possibly by overhearing her conversations during his shifts. Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law informed the police of their suspicions regarding him. Law enforcement officers decided to investigate Kenneth as a potential suspect in the murder. They spoke with him, but he denied any involvement and did not show any typical signs of a murderer. However, his previous involvement in a knife fight raised suspicions against him. When the police interviewed Kenneth again, he provided a solid alibi, supported by documentation. He had a time card that clearly indicated the hours he worked at the restaurant, which confirmed his statement. His colleagues, who were on duty with him that night, also verified his alibi. Kenneth explained that he left home the night before at 10 p.m., worked the night shift, and did not leave the restaurant until around 9 a.m. the next morning. A friend drove him back home, where his girlfriend could also confirm his presence. He did not stay long at home. He quickly changed clothes, took a shower, and left. By 10 a.m., he was attending a court hearing related to an incident involving a police officer. Given his tight schedule, he simply did not have the opportunity to commit the crime before his court appearance. Kenneth dressed neatly and left for court, where he remained until 11 a.m. Afterward, he returned to the restaurant and stayed there until 12:30 p.m. When he got home, he encountered the police, who were canvassing the neighborhood. They spoke with him, examined his clothes and body for any blood or scratches, finding none, which did not raise any suspicion. A forensic expert determined that the murder occurred around 7 a.m., likely soon after her husband Charles left for work. Detectives believe the crime could have taken place between 7 and 10:45 a.m., when the body was discovered. Given the limited time Kenneth had before the trial, it seemed unlikely that he could have committed the crime and escaped unnoticed. After verifying Kenneth's alibi, he was removed from the list of suspects due to a lack of evidence of criminal activity. However, investigators did not completely rule him out of the investigation as the case progressed, though they did not find any new evidence. Fingerprints retrieved from the crime scene did not match any in existing databases, which were not very advanced at that time. The investigation stalled for 2 years with little to no progress. During this time, a man named Robert Osborne contacted the police, claiming he had important information regarding Catherine's murder. However, he expected to receive a reward for his testimony. Detectives indicated that a reward could only be offered to someone providing valuable information that led to an arrest. Robert suggested that law enforcement should interview Kenneth's ex-girlfriend, Brenda Marsh. At the time of the call, Robert was dating Brenda and was familiar with Kenneth's situation. He claimed that Kenneth had confessed to the murder during a private conversation. By the time the police received this tip, Brenda had already broken up with Kenneth, who was living elsewhere. Brenda confirmed that at the time of Katrina's murder, she and Kenneth were living together. She described Kenneth as rude and cruel. Brenda had a daughter with him, and they were struggling financially. Following the advice of Robert, her new boyfriend, she decided to turn Kenneth in, hoping to receive a reward that would help her situation. According to Brenda, on the evening of May 20, 1980, Kenneth left their home around 10 p.m. to go to work at a restaurant. However, when they called the restaurant later, they found out that Kenneth had not arrived there at the expected time. Brenda was uncertain about what time Kenneth returned home or whether he had gone to the restaurant at all. The next morning, he came back with a deep, fresh scratch on his face that was still bleeding. When Brenda asked him about it, he replied that it was none of her business. He quickly changed his clothes, took a shower, and left for a court appointment. When Kenneth returned from court regarding an assault case, Brenda informed him that the police were already investigating at their home. Kenneth was very upset about this and told Brenda that if the police asked her about him, she should say he hadn't lived there for about a month. After the investigation stalled, they relocated and waited a bit to avoid drawing attention to their escape. Brenda attempted to inquire about the incident with Kenneth, but he brushed off her concerns, stating that it was none of her business. However, one night, while drunk, he revealed that he had interacted with a German woman to take her money. Kenneth's testimony was contradicted by his time card, which showed he arrived at work on time and left only at 9 a.m. Brenda's statements also conflicted with the fact that Kenneth spoke to the police when he returned home and had no visible scratches on his face. Brenda's suspicions seemed unfounded. She could simply be a scorned ex seeking revenge on Kenneth. To clarify the situation, she was offered a polygraph test, which she took and passed. The detectives then decided to conduct a further investigation into Kenneth's background. They found another ex-girlfriend who claimed that Kenneth had also confessed to murdering a German woman, whom he referred to casually. Despite this new testimony, there was still little evidence against him. The fingerprints found on the toaster and faucet in the kitchen where Katrina died did not match Kenneth. This investigation took place in 1982, before DNA testing was available. To eliminate any doubts, they compared Kenneth's blood type with the blood found at the scene, and they matched it. The detectives viewed this as solid evidence of Kenneth's guilt, despite the low accuracy of such comparisons. It appeared that the prosecutor was eager to close the case quickly and needed someone to blame. Given the personal nature of the crime and its brutality, the police decided to thoroughly search for a possible motive. Kenneth had a difficult childhood that significantly shaped his life. He harbored a long-standing dislike for Katrina, feeling resentful towards her and her children. They all grew up together, and Katrina's children often boasted about their pocket money, which upset Kenneth because his family struggled financially. One day, driven by frustration, Kenneth and his sister broke into Katrina's house, stealing sweets and money from her children's piggy bank. At that time, Kenneth was only 10 years old. Katrina was understandably furious and insisted on taking action against him for his unacceptable behavior. Then, Kenneth was taken from his family and placed in a juvenile correctional facility at age 10. There, he faced harsh conditions alongside older teens who had committed more serious offenses. Kenneth found this experience traumatic and rarely spoke about it, yet he held a deep resentment towards Katrina for her role in his imprisonment. Despite the hostility he faced from others, his sister, Betty Ann, supported him. Although she was younger, Betty was very close to Kenneth and always believed he was innocent. Despite Betty's support, Kenneth was arrested 2 years after Katrina's tragic death and charged with her murder. The hearing was set for 1983. Kenneth remained calm about the upcoming trial, confident in his alibi, which was supported by a timesheet. However, from the very beginning, the odds were stacked against him. His former girlfriend, Brenda, testified against him, sharing even more information than before. She claimed to have been in close contact with a friend of Katrina's who had previously dated Kenneth. Catherine's friend stated that Kenneth had given her a ring a few months after Catherine's death. Upon seeing the ring, Brenda realized it resembled one she had seen on Katrina before the murder. Photos of the ring were presented as evidence during the trial. The prosecution utilized clever tactics and presented various pieces of circumstantial evidence. Kenneth's lawyer believed he had a good chance of avoiding a conviction and advised him not to testify in his own defense. However, when it was time to present evidence of Kenneth's innocence, the timesheet had mysteriously disappeared. Without it, and relying only on his family's claims that he was a good person, there was no substantial proof to support his innocence. Consequently, Kenneth Walters was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The defense argued that Kenneth was fortunate that the state did not have the death penalty, otherwise, he would have faced execution. Kenneth maintained his innocence and requested a retrial, but only his sister Betty supported him. Others believed she was too emotionally attached and forgave him for his past mistakes. His history of wrongdoings influenced the jury's decision against him. Initially, his lawyer believed in his innocence and worked diligently to exonerate him. However, all appeals were denied. As time passed, the lawyer's enthusiasm dwindled. Kenneth lost the opportunity to have his case reconsidered and was left to serve a life sentence in prison. His family believed his imprisonment was due to his lack of financial resources. He could not afford a skilled lawyer. After all his appeals were turned down, no attorney wanted to take on his case. Kenneth accepted his fate, but Betty remained determined. She frequently visited him in prison and continued to believe in his innocence, steadfastly pursuing justice on his behalf. Kenneth had a difficult personality and frequently caused problems in prison, which made it hard for anyone to make excuses for his behavior. He even tried to end his life out of despair. During one visit, Betty was unable to see him because he was in solitary confinement after getting into a fight with another inmate. Once he was released from solitary, they were able to meet, and Betty had a heartfelt conversation with him, expressing her determination to help him get out of prison. Their trust in lawyers had faded, especially since many refused to take on Kenneth's case. Betty felt she could only rely on herself. At that time, she hadn't completed high school and lacked the necessary education. She had also divorced her husband, who had discouraged her from helping Kenneth. As a single mother of 2, she worked as a waitress, struggling to support herself and her children, but she remained committed to helping Kenneth. Betty first focused on finishing high school and then enrolled in college. She managed to balance her night shifts as a waitress while raising her kids. Despite the challenges, her determination and strong feelings propelled her forward. Betty eventually became a lawyer, fully knowledgeable about Kenneth's case but puzzled about how his timesheet went missing. Additionally, she discovered that Brenda, who reported a large scratch on Kenneth's face the day Katrina was murdered, had lied, as Kenneth had been in court, then at a restaurant, and later speaking with detectives. Those reports did not mention any injuries on Kenneth. It was odd that no one else noticed the scratch. Detectives typically pay close attention to such details, especially since Kenneth was one of the suspects from the beginning. Betty continuously reviewed the evidence and found substantial confirmation of her suspicions. Furthermore, she learned that Brenda did not actually take a polygraph test. Instead, Brenda only passed a voice test, which can indicate lies but is less reliable than a polygraph. Kenneth successfully passed the lie detector test, which should have worked in his favor, but this detail was not mentioned during the trial. As Betty investigated the circumstances surrounding Kenneth's conviction, she increasingly realized that law enforcement had seemingly chosen him as a scapegoat. Brenda went to the police after realizing that Kenneth had received a life sentence and admitted that she had lied under pressure from Robert, who hoped to gain financially. She also desired revenge on her ex, Kenneth, and felt pressured by the police. Now, she regretted that her actions had led to an innocent man being imprisoned for life. Another ex-girlfriend also revealed that she testified against Kenneth due to pressure from a female police officer who had a personal bias against him and was intent on seeing him convicted. It wasn't until 1999 that Betty gained access to significant evidence, specifically DNA samples collected from the crime scene. She uncovered a box of documents and samples, including blood and hair, that had never been analyzed before. The examination revealed that the DNA from the crime scene did not match Kenneth's. However, both law enforcement and the public worked to prevent the case from being reopened, while Katrina's family strongly resisted any new investigation. In 2000, Betty successfully reached out to the Innocence Project, a group of lawyers dedicated to assisting wrongfully convicted individuals. This organization had a team of experts and the resources needed to conduct thorough investigations. Betty presented evidence proving Kenneth's innocence, convincing the project to take on his case. She also contacted a female police officer involved in the investigation, who had a questionable reputation and had previously compromised her credibility in another case. Many in law enforcement spoke poorly of her, raising suspicions that she had intentionally framed Kenneth and had not lost key evidence by chance. Furthermore, inconsistencies in the testimonies of Kenneth's former girlfriends were exposed, particularly regarding a ring that was shown to the jury. It was discovered that the ring had been sent to Germany and did not match the jewelry owned by Kenneth's ex-girlfriend. It was smaller and unsuitable for Katrina. Betty sought to find the ring to counter another piece of evidence against Kenneth. She learned that the ring had initials engraved on it that did not belong to Katrina. Ultimately, due to Betty's extensive efforts in uncovering these discrepancies, the case was reopened, and the prosecutor dropped the charges against Kenneth. After spending 18 years, 5 months, and 10 days in prison, Kenneth was finally acquitted and became a free man. He was able to enjoy life again after being deprived of it for so long. Unfortunately, tragedy struck. On September 19, 2001, while visiting his brother's house, Kenneth decided to take a shortcut that required him to climb over a tall wall. He did not realize the wall on the other side was even higher. When he jumped from a height of 15 feet, he fell awkwardly, struck his head, and later died in the hospital. Betty, Kenneth's sister, remembered that those 6 months after his release were the happiest of his life. After so many years in prison, everything felt new to him. Even after his death, Betty continued to fight for justice. In 2004, she filed a lawsuit against the city for the wrongful imprisonment of Kenneth and the impact it had on their lives. By 2009, she successfully won the case, receiving $10.5 million in compensation. In this story, Katrina's murder case remains unsolved and often forgotten. The blood found at the crime scene was tested, but no matches were found in the police database. The identity of the person who brutally took her life remains unknown. Her family hopes that one day, the case will be solved.